Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Planning Committee on the 5th of March 2024. Thank you very much for members for attending, and to offer thanks to those in the public gallery. Thank you very much, and to members of the press and to our public speakers. I'll start by introducing our officers of the Planning Department. On my right, we have Mr. Ollie Bolter, who is the Strategic Manager for Planning and Infrastructure. So on my right, Ms. Sarah Wilkinson, the Planning Development Manager, and equally on my right, Mr. James Brewer, our Planning Policy Manager. We have Neil Troughton, who is our Highways Representative, Ben Gard, our Legal Advisor, and Ms. Mary Bartlett, our Committee Clerk. And Councillor Paul Fuller is also attending as the Cabinet Member for Planning, Coastal Protection and Flooding, but will also be speaking on one of the agenda items. A few housekeeping matters. So there are no planned fire drills during this meeting. If you do hear the fire alarm sound, please treat it as a real emergency and evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route. The nearest escape route is via the signposted set of stairs to your left as you leave the council chamber or the public gallery. Exit via the door at the back of the building, walk across the inner car park around the building to the evacuation point, which is the pavement opposite the police station. Lifts cannot be used in the case of an emergency, and please do not re-enter the building until you're advised it is safe to do so. If I could ask that everyone in the chamber and the public gallery kindly switches their mobile phones off, if not already, and for speakers, if you could use the microphones. I think it's actually either button at the front, the silver buttons, which will operate for that on and off. It's just the right button. If I could ask that no food is consumed during the meeting unless it is for a medical need. And as members of the committee are aware, they cannot leave the council chamber during the presentation or the debate. And if they do leave, they will be unable to vote on that application. Members in the public gallery and watching virtually, thank you very much for your attendance. Just as a reminder that you're here purely to observe the process and won't be permitted to speak unless you have registered to speak in advance. So that done, we'll run through the lighting system. So when you're asked to speak, the green light will display. And when the red light displays, I will stop you talking. And this is to ensure that all parties receive the same amount of time and the process is seen to be fair. So we go to apologies and changes in membership. We've had apologies for councillors Jonathan Bacon and Chris Quirk and Martin Oliver. We then move to the previous meeting minutes. Are there any suggested changes, or are we happy with those? I see nods of assent. I shall take that as an affirmation and sign those. Declarations of interest. Excellent. In which case we go to public question time. Actually, no public questions have been received, so those questions are restricted to matters not on the agenda. We shall move straight then to the planning report. So that is our Shalfleet application. So this is application reference 22/00989/FUL. Redevelopment of site provides 70 residential dwellings, including 27 affordable units to include associated roads, etc. I shall turn to Ms. Sarah Wilkinson, who's going to be presenting the report. So thank you, Ms. Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Apologies. Just move the microphone slightly closer. Good afternoon, members. The application site lies on the southern side of Burt Close, which is a relatively new housing development off Main Road in Shalfleet at the point of the cursor. So that would provide access to the application site, which is the area outlined in red on this plan at the point of the cursor. It's approximately L-shaped. It covers an area of 4.05 hectares to the south of Burt Close, and for location purposes it also sits to the west of Warlands Lane, which runs at the point of the cursor here. This plan also shows with the circles up it on the main road where the existing bus stops are located. I thought it would be useful to incorporate a plan showing the designations in and around the area because a number of them are referenced within the officer report. Councillors, you will see that the area that is the kind of yellow, the very like lemony yellow, that is the AONB. That's referenced a number of times. The site is the area outlined in red. The red circles with white stars are the listed buildings, which are again referenced in the report. There's a cluster around the conservation area here, which is the brown, and then a cluster here and here, as well as going down here. Around the edge of the site, the L that runs around the edge of the site is the ancient semi-woodland that's also referred to in the report, which together with the designation as an ancient semi-woodland, it is also a site of importance for nature conservation, a SIN. The application seeks consent for 70 houses. These would be set out in a layout that would form units alongside the road as well as small cul-de-sacs around a new village green area at the point of the cursor. There would also be incorporated a buffer zone along, again in an L shape along the this edge, the southern and western edge of the site, which would provide the 50-metre buffer to the ancient semi-woodland, which sits just outside this red line boundary. The proposal also includes a footpath here to link to Warlands Lane, as well as a continuation of the footpath to that runs to the side of Burke Close, which would provide a link from the main road through to Warlands Lane along the edge of the site. I've incorporated this image, which councillors we had during the site visit. You all had a copy which shows the points of the closest 1 to 8 of the visual impact assessment and the visual points that were taken. And the report references these, so I thought it would be useful to show where they're taken from. You've effectively running around the site 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. Those link to the following photographs of those views. Obviously, we were on site on Friday, so I won't linger on these for too long. You've got 1, 2 and 3. We've then got 4 and 5. Apologies for the quality of some of these at the point here on the slide. What I've done is splice together. They were split in street scenes, so I put them together so you can see it as one view. But they were split. So there will be points where there's a slight line. So my apologies. Hopefully it's still useful to see it as one image. You've got 3, 4 and 5, 6 and 7, and then 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15. Those are 16 and 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 and 22. And those are all referenced in various points within the report, so I thought it would be useful just to show them. As stated, the application seeks consent for 70 houses in cul-de-sac formation, in little clusters in essence, as well as some units that front onto the highway itself. They would be a range of mainly 2-storey, with some that could be seen as effectively single 2.5 storey, so kind of more chalet style units, but they are all in the form of either semi-detached or detached. And I've incorporated a selection of the property types. They are a different approach to those to the north on the existing Burke Close site. The majority would be brick with a combination of either slate or clay tile, with an element of render. So this shows some of the units that are proposed. At the point in which you see a yellow star on the properties, so you'll note there's one on this slide here. They're the nature of properties that sit closest to the boundary with the neighbouring properties. I thought it would be useful to identify which ones those were in terms of unit types. You'll note the report references how those have been designed to ensure that actually any first floor windows are either stairwells or they are bathrooms, so you don't have overlooking or impact on neighbouring properties from an officer's opinions. Again, we move through for some different unit types and a range of different materials. There will be similarities to the theme of the design, but with an alteration in the use of materials in order to show a variety in the street scene. and then some further units. These are the units I was referring to that are more single story to 1.5 stories along some of the boundaries of the site to minimise that impact on neighbours. I've also incorporated a slide showing the street scenes, or 4 of the potential street scene elevations. You can see, I'm not sure how well you'll be able to see it, but in the plan at this point, where those are taken from. So they effectively run down the spine, the main central spine road of the application. And we'll hopefully show you that in a bit more detail and how they would sit together. So they've been positioned in order to ensure that the street scenes have a range of different unit types and a mix of appearance. I thought it would be useful to incorporate this plan to show the links to and from the site and around the site. This shows the existing footpath network through the site. You'll note there are conditions referencing the link to the proposed link to footpath 13, which would in essence run along the top of the site, an extension to the existing footpath, which would be seen effectively. The A on this is the end of that current top link that was built as part of the Burt Close application. This development would see that link continuing down to join into footpath 13 that provides that greater link loop around. And as stated, there would also be a link from the site into Warlands Lane at this point. If I just return to the layout plan and say thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson. We now move to the public speaking elements of the agenda item. So if I could invite Ms. Joanna Minchin, who's the Vice Chairman of the West White Village Residents Association, to speak. And you have 2 minutes, Ms. Minchin. Thank you.
I represent over 180 members of the West White Villages Residents Association who all passionately oppose this application. There are many flaws, but I focus on affordability. I grew up in Shalfleet. I did not object to the 24 houses at Burt's Close, understanding them to be social houses intended to alleviate local need. I was appalled at what was built. They are an eyesore, totally out of context for the medieval village of Shalfleet, with virtually no local people occupying them. The island's average income is barely above minimum wage. I still live locally, have a respectable job in a respectable business in the West White. I calculate that as a first-time buyer on my current wage, I would not be able to afford even the cheapest of these houses, even with its 20% discount. My children were at school at the same time as some of your children. We all need to look in the metaphorical mirror and ask ourselves, what houses do we need to build for our children to encourage them to remain on the Isle of Wight? You surely know the answer. Small, sustainably located, well-insulated, genuinely affordable for an island wage. If, as councillors, you want to leave your legacy, I urge you to allow only genuinely affordable houses, not developer-led estates on green fields. You will be aware of the CPRE's study showing enough brownfield sites on the island that would solve our local housing needs. Your draft island plan pledges that green fields will be protected. The Better Island project explains how challenging access is to decent houses on local island wages. The rise in house prices and private rentals is partly driven by older homeowners moving from the mainland. I urge you to throw out this application and focus on genuinely affordable houses for local people on local wages. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Minchin. I'd now like to invite Mr. Henry Blaxell to speak for 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Blaxell.
Chair, the final planning application submitted by the applicant is that a new pumping station on the site will pump to Fleetway and then to Shalfleet Treatment Works. This is deceptive. The actuality is that the sewage system travels down towards Mill Lane by gravity through Church Lane, where significant spillage occurs. This is well before the treatment works and any mitigation that is occasioned thereby, and in fact creates a terrible situation for the community and the environment at large. It is important that you all understand this you can have as many mitigations up at the treatment works, which are 3/4 of a mile from the Mill Road pumping station, which will have no effect on this dreadful stain on Shalfleet and has been persistent for many years. The planning officer in his report at 7127128 says this is an existing situation and therefore not caused by this development. The point about it is, though, that this development will add significantly to the pressure and the load on the system, as have previous developments. Perhaps the more important point that we have, though, to consider here is that the mitigation that is proposed to be put in place is a wetland which has been purchased from land next door to the treatment works. The local planning authority can only approve new development if the mitigation strategies were certain at the time of assessment and no scientific doubt that the proposed development would have an adverse impact on the integrity of the site. This development will have a significant effect on Newtown Harbour.
Thank you, Mr. Blaxell. I'd like to now invite Mr. Andrew Lomax to speak also for 2 minutes. Mr. Lomax.
Chair and members, I submit that this is not sustainable development, and as such, the presumption in favour of sustainable development does not apply. It is not sustainable because it destroys productive farmland, is in a rural location, and with very limited services, gives rise to significant additional car usage, is miles from a GP surgery, is disconnected from the local school, shop, village hall, church, and pub, will overload the sewers. It will materially harm biodiversity and the surrounding landscape and will not improve local employment prospects. This analysis is backed up by your own rural sustainability matrix, which attributes only low or limited growth to the village. The development will be detached from the village, socially remote, just like Burt's Close, and particularly so where many of the occupants are likely to be elderly and have mobility issues. Following the recent planning framework, the council no longer must follow the government's standard approach to housing numbers, and footnote 25, which I'm sure you're all aware of, to the framework gives you the opportunity to determine a much lower number. The council should not permit this development just to satisfy misapplied housing numbers, especially when well over 2,000 outstanding housing permissions have still to be built out. I recognise the real need for affordable housing on the island, but using that as an expedient to develop this land is a misjudgment. For the need to be effectively tackled will, as the council have recognised, require significant public subsidy and intervention, and not more market housing, which will go mainly to retiring mainlanders, and in doing so, burdening the island's social care system.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Lomax. We now turn to Ms. Shirley Stables of Shalfleet Parish Council. Ms. Stables, you have 6 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. This application, if permitted, will dramatically change the village of Shalfleet's character. The A3054 is a very busy road. The extra traffic use that will be caused by this development would increase the traffic flow and road safety issues, which include a high risk of flooding in the hollow below this development. Street and household lighting will greatly increase the light pollution in the area. The school is currently oversubscribed, and children from a new development may not be considered or offered a place which is detrimental to local families. Off-road access to the school is non-existent, with no evidence that adjacent landowners have been approached about the availability of their land to provide a safe way for both pedestrians and cyclists. The new inn is closed for the foreseeable future. Thus, means of creating community cohesion is greatly reduced and difficult to achieve. The shop It's a thriving family business doing very well. And after speaking with the owners, I have been assured that they do not need an additional 70 homes for survival. Sewerage. Southern Water have done very little to resolve our existing issues, with overspilling and spillages occurring frequently. This development will greatly increase this. Regarding affordable housing, our past experience proves that we have no confidence in the allocation of these homes being to people that have a local connection, whether that be for work or living. There are questions as to how this will be achieved and managed. Our previous objections as a parish council remain valid. They should and need to be taken into consideration, as we firmly believe this application is unsustainable. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Stales. We turn now to Mr Nick Taylor, the agent, and Mr Taylor, you have 3 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just pick up on some of those points. Criticism was made of Burt Close as being an eyesore. If you look at the landscaping, or perhaps lack of landscaping, one can sympathise with that point of view. This current application we've taken is totally different approach. Previous scheme was dealt with by a housing association outside of our control. But you will have seen from the layout plan that the officer put up on the screen, there'll be substantial structural planting along the west boundary that will be secured by planning condition. There is concern about on drainage, about the impact of additional development. This has been addressed in the drainage report by our consultants. Southern Water have upgraded the treatment works at Shalfleet last year to the tune of £2 million or thereabouts. And in terms of nitrates, my colleague, Mr. Jacobs, we've looked very carefully at that and been advised by a consultant on nitrates. And Mr. Jacobs will explain how that will be remedied. In terms of biodiversity, we had ecological consultants look at the biodiversity of the site and the ecology of it. And we have looked at all the wildlife aspects and in particular, the impact on Pond Close Copse, which is especially protected area. And there will be a buffer as requested by Natural England on the western and southern boundaries, to which there will be very little public access. The delivery of the footpath has been queried. Our client, who you saw from one of the plans presented by the planning officer, the delivery of a footpath to Shalfleet School, he undertakes to provide that footpath on land within his ownership, which extends a considerable distance to the west. He cannot deliver the entire length to the school, but at the request of the planning officer, he did contact the local landowners involved. So the person who queried that was actually incorrect. We have in writing that he contacted those adjacent landowners. They declined to make their land available. Our client has done all he can and has also agreed to make a substantial contribution, about £70,000, I think, towards the delivery of that footpath if those adjacent landowners were to then agree. So we've done everything within our power to secure that connection. There will be connections into the village, both via Wallands Lane and Main Road. So I think to describe it as being disconnected is incorrect. I better shut up now.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Taylor. We turn now to Mr. Simon Jacobs, the applicant. Mr. Jacobs, you have 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. First, the 2 areas I really want to just talk to you about. First one is this whole question of affordable houses, and one of the reasons why, the main reason why we are doing this and why we put this application is that my siblings and I, who own the site, and have been involved with Shalfleet for over 30 years now, believe passionately in young people and generations of the same family continuing to live in the village. And I really draw your attention to one particular family, the Burt family, who Burt Close are named after. That family came to this village, came to Shalfleet in the early 40s. Bill worked with us as the farm manager. His son, Alex, is now, Bill sadly has died, but his son, Alex, was brought up in the village, and we very saw him growing up. He now lives on the East White, on the other side of the Medina. He would very much like to come back, as we know there are others. And unfortunately, back in 2017, 18, 19, with Burt's Close, there was such a demand. I mean, they were over 4 times oversubscribed. This is Sovereign, the housing association that bought the site and developed it, 4 times oversubscribed. So poor Alex didn't get a look in. He was that far down the list. So one of the, this is one of the key reasons that we want to see young people who were born and raised in the village being able to stay in the village. And this will help them to do that. The other area I want to just identify and just talk you through is the whole question of eutrophication. As you all know, I'm sure, Newtown Harbour suffers from eutrophication, which is basically algae growing on the surface of the water. And it just blankets and kills off the ecosystem. What we've done is we're working with a local company, Gallingale, who have now planning to put in reed beds adjacent to the treatment works. Now, this basically means that we have now secured credits from Gallingale and it's a significant amount of money to buy these credits, which will then enable the wetlands to be built, which will be built in the next 12 to 18 months, so that by the time this development is built, all the water that's going through that treatment works, not just from our site, but from the entire village, the nitrates will be removed by the wetland, so that the water that's going into the harbour, into Shalfleet Creek and the Newtown Harbour will no longer be heavily loaded with nitrates, which will then, I hope, we are very confident, and Natural England are very confident, that this will solve the eutrophication problem in what is a triple SI. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Jacobs. We now turn to Councillor Nick Stewart, who is the local councillor, also a member of Planning Committee. So, Councillor Stewart, you, I believe, have an unlimited time to speak. Thank you.
But I won't take an unlimited time, I promise. Okay, I'm wearing 2 hats today. Everybody is aware of it, but for the public record, I'm sitting here as ward councillor. You will note that I have raised no objection or approval to this particular application. And at this stage, I am simply putting forward the views of the resident. When I take my seat on Plan Committee, I will then consider what has been said by those residents and by all the people on the council, on the Plan Committee, and I will also consider any answers to questions which are made. So let me go straight on to the major concerns of the residents. There are a lot of residents who have spoken up. It is a substantial proportion of the local population, and they have objected. They have objected on sustainability grounds, and the first thing is that this is a relatively small rural village where 70 houses are a substantially large proportion of that village. It will create a new village. There are basically 4 areas of Shalfleet, and for all intents and purposes, it is very difficult to get, or relatively difficult to get between those 4. This would create a far west version of this village. The lack of a footpath to Shalfleet School is of concern. I am aware that the planning officers have spent a large amount of time and the developer has taken such action as they could, but nonetheless, there is no footpath to Shalfleet School, which brings us on to the one of the most important things, which is fundamentally this development is based around the car. You will need a car to get to school if you have children. You will need a car to get to work because the buses are infrequent. You will need a car to go to the shops because the very small shop in Shalfleet, although very, very nice and good, I know them, nonetheless is unable to supply everything you could possibly need. You will need a car to go to church because to be honest, not many people are going to walk all the way down. You will need a car to get into Newport to get everything that you need. I could go on. The facilities of the village are very limited. The village hall has noted, it has been noted by people who run it, that the number of people coming from Burt's Close, which is already there, is very low because they have to travel alongside, on a footpath, alongside what is fundamentally a busy road. I know that we're not allowed to take into account the fact that there is a 30-mile-an-hour limit, which is being ignored, but nonetheless, that is a fact. People have that perception that it is dangerous, and therefore it is not well used. Generally, facilities for leisure, for exercise are also fairly limited there. It is a stunning rural area, and I have to say I am really lucky to represent it. And then you come on to the visual aspects. We have seen a number of photographs from this area. If you go around this site, as I have done, if you go around the woodland, which I have done on frequent occasions, I hasten to add, I have kept my dog under control the entire time. You will see that this is a visually very clear area, and that notwithstanding any shielding, you will be introducing a significant urban area to the village. The concern is also about the previous development at Burt's Close, which notwithstanding who has control over it, is badly landscaped, and quite a few of the conditions that were applied to that development don't appear to have occurred. So invariably in the local community, there is concern that those conditions have not been met. And you will note that the planning officers have raised, I think, 24 specific areas of requirements for this development. Affordable housing has been mentioned previously. So as I'm only speaking for residents, I will say that is something that you need to be aware of. A 20% discount on an average house in Shalfleet is still going to leave an awful lot to make up for most people on the island in the sort of jobs that they have. There is no specific management plan at the moment in place for who would actually deal with that affordable housing, and it's difficult to ascertain exactly how many of those would be for rental housing. In my view, speaking on behalf of the residents, I would suggest that the residents do not appreciate this. They believe that it breaches a large number of the NPPF requirements. We've mentioned sustainability. We mentioned that in terms of the environment, in terms of the place itself, in terms of the transport links available for this. So my residents would very much urge you to reject this plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. That concludes the public speaking elements of this agenda item. So we'll turn now to the question part of this agenda. I'm keen to try to maintain the demarcation between the questions and the debate, simply because I think it assists particularly the public in terms of clarity of what is before them. Are there any questions from Councillor Peter Spink, Councillor Julie Jones-Evans thereafter? Councillor Spink.
Thank you, Chair. I have a few questions, I'm afraid. I can ask them all in one go, or perhaps ask two or three and then another session, but I do have a number of important questions. The first one I hadn't intended to ask, but just as clarification, Ms. Wilkinson, the comment that made by one of the speakers that nitrate neutrality needs to be established at the time of granting consent. Do you agree with that as a matter of law?
Yes.
Okay. So I was going to ask you if you agree with that in law, and if you do, where does planning committee go from here? I've been trying to turn my computer on, it doesn't want to work, but I also, from memory, think there's no habitats regulation assessment. And where does that go from here in that case? Southern Water in their statement propose that there should be an odor assessment if a development is within 500 meters from the wastewater treatment plant. This development, they say, is 400 meters. I don't believe there's been an odor assessment. The batch report is out of date. It expired on September 2023. Perhaps you can confirm, because that's not really a question. As far as I can recall, no statement from the AONB, despite its proximity when you showed the map. And for now, I'd like to ask you if I may, but why don't, if you answer those, please, and then I'll give someone else a turn, and perhaps I can have another go at some other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I'm minded to give Ms Wilkinson a few moments, given the length of the questions, which is certainly no criticism, but I think comprehensive and compendious as usual. Ms Wilkinson.
On. There we are.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. In regards to the nitrate neutrality issue, it must be it is law that it must be established that the mitigation proposed is appropriate and achievable in essence. We have, as an authority, a nitrate position statement which we have agreed with Natural England, and they are happy with the general principle set out in that if a scheme will comply with the principles set out within the nitrate position statement, a scheme can achieve nitrate neutrality, and therefore it would be acceptable. In this instance, a appropriate assessment has been undertaken. Natural England have assessed it, and they are happy with the approach that the applicant has taken in relation to this site. There has been significant discussions that have taken place in order to get to that point, and that is why the scheme is a combination of the addition of the on-site planting as part of the buffer zone, as well as the provision of a wetland off-site, or contribution towards a or credits towards a wetland. Natural England have looked at that; they are satisfied. With regards to Southern Water.
Yes, no, I think you can have a supplementary.
For that one question. The mitigation hasn't yet been built. There's no scientific evidence in the papers as to the level of nitrate neutrality that it will achieve. We can't surely issue a planning consent when we don't know whether or not the mitigation will be accepted, it will be effective. And whether Natural England is so sloppy as to not notice that, I don't know, but it's not acceptable in my submission. There isn't a habitats regulations assessment. I thought that was a legal requirement. There is, my mistake then, and that's can't get my computer on, but I maintain the previous point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Yes, certainly. I'm going to bring in Mr. Brewer in relation to your question, Councillor Spink. Mr. Brewer.
Thank you, Chair. So just for clarification on the wetland scheme and the mitigation. So as LPA, we have to be certain at the point of decision that the mitigation is available. The mitigation is provided through a wetland scheme, which has a separate planning permission, which has already been granted. Natural England supported that application, and the technical evidence that went behind that in terms of the amount of nitrate credits that wetland scheme would generate. So that has a separate planning permission, which has already been granted with the support of Natural England, and that is the wetland scheme that's providing the credits effectively for this development to purchase. And as set out in our position statement, there are two ways that a development scheme can offset nitrate neutrality. One is to connect to Sandown wastewater treatment works. The second, if they don't, is to purchase credits. And that's what this scheme is doing, is buying credits which are being generated by that wetland scheme, which has a separate planning permission already granted. Hopefully that provides some clarity, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Brewer. I shall revert now to Ms. Wilkinson regarding the remainder of Councillor Spink's questions. Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson.
Thank you very much. In relation to the Southern Water pollution and odour assessment, Southern Water have raised this on a number of applications in the past. Officers have taken the position, in essence, when this has been requested by Southern Water, as to the reasonableness of the request in relation to the proximity of other dwellings to the system that they're proposing. The odour assessment needs to be undertaken in relation to. So if I try and explain, if there are residential properties significantly closer than the proposed unit to that system, officers do not consider it reasonable to require an odour assessment, because there is already a significant amount of people being affected, and therefore it is up to Southern Water to mitigate those effects for those people. Therefore, the addition of additional people into that area further from the source of the odour isn't a reasonable requirement. And so it isn't something that officers have asked for in this instance, and don't think that it is necessary.
You may, if I could keep it brief at this moment, not to curtail you, but I'm keen that we also hear from other councillors.
Of course, but it is
thank you.
very important.
appreciate
I don't want to take up unnecessary time. Basically, what you're saying is it is a number of houses can put up with the smell. This new development can, and it's not an assumption that the assumption that Southern Water will do its job properly has to be a reasonable assumption. Now, the other houses have been there since the 80s, and I'm not aware of any odour work that Southern Water has carried out. And indeed, one might think, do you not agree, that Southern Water wouldn't make that suggestion if it had carried out the assessment. They would simply state that although it's within the boundary of the odour zone, we've carried out sufficient assessment and alterations. So it remains the case that a requirement of Southern Water for this LPA hasn't been satisfied, I suggest.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Turning to the balance of your questions, Ms. Wilkinson.
Thank you. I think, yes, I think from our perspective, officers have obviously answered the question in relation to how we have considered that comment and how it has been considered in relation to the application. At no point are officers suggesting that the existing residents put up with the smell and therefore more residents should just put up with the smell. I think the question is that if there is an issue, it is likely to be able to be controlled by other regimes, because actually it's a current issue that is being affected, that would be affecting far more residents. At the moment, I am not aware of a substantial odour issue in relation to any of the facilities within Shelfleet. Certainly, it wasn't something that I'm aware any objector raised in relation to the application. To state that there is currently a significant odour. I certainly drive through Shelfleet most days, and I've never smelt an odour in relation to such an issue. So it's one I would question. Also, I think what is important to note is that the NPPF is clear that the focus of planning policies and decisions should be on whether the proposed development is acceptable use of land, rather than the control of processes or emissions, where these are subject to separate pollution control regimes. Planning decisions should assume that these regimes will operate effectively. Equally, where a planning decision has been made on a particular development, the planning issues should not revisit those of the permitting regimes operated by pollution control authorities. That is paragraph 194 of the NPPF. From our perspective, if there is a significant odour issue in relation to an existing Southern Water facility, that is a matter for other regimes to deal with, not the planning process. In relation to the back report being out of date, I would dispute that. I think the application was submitted in 2002. The argument, no, sorry, that it wasn't. That was even before my time. In 2022. The suggestion was that it expires in 2023. Obviously, a planning consent if a planning application is granted, a consent stands for 3 years. We work on the basis that therefore any report from the point in which the application is approved has a 3-year lifespan, because that is the way it works. So I would suggest that there would not be a significant change in circumstance between the submitted application in 2022 and where we find ourselves today. We are within that tolerance area from our position, from officers' opinions. In relation
to interrupt. Sorry, Chair, may I have a quick supplementary on that? Ms. Wilkinson? The batch report states, it's dated the 8th of September 2022, and it states this report will need to be renewed in September 23. The bat report is out of date. There is no doubt about that. It's in the report. Is that not right?
For those watching at home, we're just going to take a very brief pause whilst we ascertain the contents of the report in relation to Councillor Spink's points.
Councillor Spink, I can confirm we've identified the section within the report that states it. What I'm trying to establish is I believe this issue may be covered by a condition within the application, and therefore I'm just clarifying whether it is something that we have already controlled. So please bear with me. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. In answer to the question, we have incorporated a condition that requires an ecological management plan to be submitted, which deals with mitigation measures and whatnot. Yet, should this be a concern of councillors, I would suggest, based on the fact there is a survey that has the results there, that it would be reasonable to require a condition that it is undertaken, because the application states the report, the paragraph referenced, so paragraph 1.12 of the introduction to the BAT report stipulates that should the proposed development not commence within 24 months of the date of this report, an updated assessment will be required. That is something that can be controlled by condition in the same way that we would do. That's the sentence that's being referred to. It was dated September 2022. So it would be sufficient. The BAT report would be up to date up until the 8th of September 2024 would be the 24 months that the BAT report indicates it is valid for. So should the development not get consent today and not commence by September 2024, it may be something that we need to consider, but officers believe that that is sufficient time to ensure that appropriate mitigation can be in place in relation to that report being up to date and sufficient.
I'm sorry, Sarah. But
If I may, Councillor Spink, I appreciate that it's a
it
valid
says
point.
Chair, it does say on the report that it needs to be renewed in September 23. How can it be suggested that it's therefore in date until September 24?
I think it's a valid point. I will revert to Ms. Wilkinson on that matter, but I'm quite keen for us to move on, and we can.
So sure, this is an extremely important matter.
I appreciate
And
it.
unless one of my questions is irrelevant, I would like permission, please, to ask them.
You certainly have it, Councillor. I'm simply making the point that I think it's also important to bring in other members of committee, and I will certainly return to you. Ms. Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I will reread the sentence. So in the introduction of the BAT survey, it does state, should the proposed development not commence within 24 months of the date of this date of report issue, an updated assessment will be required. The date of report issue is the 8th of September 2022. I am unclear where it stipulates that that report will be out of date in 2023, and therefore I would require Councillor Spink to identify specifically the paragraph that he's referring to, because the paragraph in the report that we're looking at stipulates 24 months from the 8th of September 2022.
Thank you.
And sorry, Chairman, in answer to the final question, no statement from the AONB or the National Landscape, as they are now called. That is correct. They have not commented on the application. The consultation with the National Landscape partnership works in that they receive the press list and they comment on applications that they wish to make representations on. No representation has been received in relation to this application. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I feel that we will probably return to this matter within the debate, but certainly moving on, I have Councillor Julie Jones-Evans, followed by Councillor Churchman. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question on design, if I may, Chair and Director Miss Wilkinson, sorry. Yeah, just that it's good to see that the layout is going to be much improved on Burt's Close. That was clear from the site visit, and the landscaping as well, once mature. That seems to be, say, a great improvement. But I do question the mix of materials. We've got buff brick, we've got reproduction stone, all sounds fine in village setting, but then are you going to render and dark stained boarding? And my question is that appropriate in this location? Does it tell the story? Is it part of the local vernacular of Shalfleet? And with the render itself, that requires some maintenance. So I do question whether that's actually a really good sustainable way forward. And especially should those houses be for affordable houses, it's an extra burden on the people living there to upkeep render, as we know, gets dirty very, very quickly. And boarding, I've seen some lovely boarding. I've also seen some hideous boarding. And I think some of the perhaps the design story that was told in Burt's Close, I think maybe gave us that impression that things can be done better. So that's my question really, is are those materials appropriate for this location and continuing the story of Shalfleet, the medieval village?
Thank you, Councillor Jones-Evans. Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Officers consider yes would be the answer to the question. Certainly, dark boarding is quite a characteristic rural material in terms of a finish, and it sits very nicely with stone. And so that was considered to be an appropriate material. I note the concerns in relation to render. There are a number of painted kind of brick or stone buildings within Shalfleet. So the kind of that principle of painted stone or render wasn't considered to be entirely unacceptable by officers. What I am just doing is double checking to see whether there is a condition in relation to materials. And in that instance, if there isn't, we can include one and have that discussion with relation to render, if that is a particular, yes, sorry. Condition 20 does state that no development should take place above foundation level until details on the materials and finishes, including mortar colour, barge boards, cladding, including colour of cladding and rainwater goods to be used in the construction of the external surfaces of the development hereby fitted has been submitted to and agreed in writing with the LPA. If councillors were specifically concerned over the use of render, I'm sure we could advise that and see if that could be phased out, should we say, of the proposed palette of materials being put forward.
Thank you. Supplementary, yes.
Yes, I do have great concerns about the use of render. Thank you for the explanation on the boards, and that does make a lot of sense in that setting. So when we get to that point, I will be offering up a condition if I can get support of other colleagues on the committee that render is perhaps looked at again and maybe not acceptable in this condition, not only for the aesthetics but also because of the maintenance issue.
Thank you, Councillor Jones-Evans. Councillor Churchman.
Yes, sorry, excuse me. Pumping station, you said it was renewed 2 years ago. I'm not a great fan of Southern Water. What did they actually do? And did they know at the time there were going to be possibly an extra 70 houses added here? Because I'm very well aware of how bad and good pumping stations can be. And what worries me is Southern Water, based in Worthing, we get emails with a tick box system. So that's my first question. If these homes were sold to what I call second home owners, how would the council know? Because as I understand it, you now need planning permission to buy and register a second home. And I think what concerns me also is Airbnb. I would hate to think that houses being built on the island for supposedly islanders are bought by people who then turn them into a business. So is there any control over that by the council? I think that'll do for the moment, Sarah. Thank you.
Councillor Churchman, Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. I would draw councillors' attention to paragraph 6.5 of the office report, which highlights that Southern Water have commented that they can facilitate foul sewage disposal for the development. So they have stated that they can facilitate the disposal. So it is not, we are unable to question their kind of comment in relation to their ability to do so, I would suggest. So it may be that, yes, they were aware of the development that was likely to come forward when they undertook the pumping station. I couldn't speculate on that matter, but certainly they have they stated within their comment on the application that they can provide foul disposal for the development. In relation to, there is certainly no requirement to apply for planning permission to register a second home or an Airbnb at present. There is discussion in regards to the use class for an Airbnb. And that is something that the government are currently exploring, but it is not yet established. So the use class hasn't changed. It remains C3, remains a dwelling. But it is something that is being explored because it is known nationally to be an issue. One thing I know we've had this discussion before in relation to this, and it's not a fail-safe, and I completely accept, because I live near one, there are Airbnbs within residential estates. But I think it is less likely that development in the nature of a housing estate of this type would come forward for an Airbnb as a matter of principle, as a matter of priority. I would suggest that's a personal presumption, but it is less likely, due to the purposes of it as being tourism, that you would be looking at necessarily something within a kind of housing development. But the risk remains. But there is no control that would be, I would state, would be reasonable to put into a planning consent to restrict that functioning. That doesn't apply to the affordable housing. So the 35% affordable housing, we could obviously restrict. It would fall into the local requirement to provide a local connection criteria. So those units would be protected and they would be linked to a local connection criteria for local people. Thank you.
Thank you. Supplementary, Councillor Chudman. No, I have now Councillor Andre, followed by Councillor Spink and then Councillor Price. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. My question focuses on the sustainability strategy and the detail that's given at 7.133. As has already been highlighted by Councillor Jones-Evans, the provision of affordable housing in terms of the initial costs is only one part of the equation. And as part of our Council's Mission Zero document, we are very keen to promote sustainability measures. Now, I note from that paragraph, it says heat pumps for space heating and hot water. I presume those are going to be individual to every property. It says renewable technologies such as PVs, which I think is photovoltaics, i.e. solar panels. Again, what is that going to relate to all the properties, some of the properties, and the properties that don't have solar panels? Is it going to be all electric? Is there going to be gas to it? And the other thing is, it says, in addition, space would be provided for electric vehicle charging points throughout the site. Well, that doesn't mean a point for every property. And bearing in mind, I know that the date keeps changing for the phasing out of petrol and diesel cars, but I think very much we should be looking towards the future. So I'd like some clarification on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. It is, I think, in terms of, I can't sit here and say that 90% of the units will have PVs on them, or that every unit will have a different thermal exchange or what in relation to that detail. However, in order to comply with building regs, it is likely that each building will have to, and so they will have to find a way to do that. So it may be that one building is done all through photovoltaics, another building is done all through heat pumps and space heating and hot water. It is likely that every unit will need a combination of all of them, but I'm not a building surveyor, so I'm not going to say I know that definitively. It's likely to be a combination of all of them to achieve the building regulation standards in relation to each property. In relation to car charging points, I believe I am correct in saying that it is now a building regulations requirement to have an electric charging point for a car. So I believe that in order to comply with parts O and L of building regulations, they will have to have one.
Sorry, just for each property. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. We now have Councillor Spink followed by Councillor Price. Councillor Spink.
I'd just like, if I may, to look at sustainability with you, Ms. Wilkinson, and that is this, that Island Roads have recommended refusal, although they say if contrary to their recommendation, planning committee grants permission, they would ask for certain conditions. Now, they say that there aren't any adequate measures to enable the promotion of sustainable travel routes, including walking to the local primary school. So if you were a resident in this new development and you lived sort of at the furthest away part, to get to the local primary school by walking, you'd have to walk right through the development. You could then turn left, so in a westerly direction, and you could go down a footpath a little way, but thereafter the footpath runs out. And it would be very dangerous, and I think your report agrees with this, it would be very dangerous to seek to walk, especially with a child, in the main carriageway of the A3054. Now, so I saw you nod that you agree with that. They also say that the spine road design does not achieve the speed limit of 20 miles per hour, so it's unsafe. And just dealing, if I may now, and I'm sorry to take up time, but just dealing, if I may now, with sustainability. The village of Shelfleet has one shop. It's, as Councillor Stewart has said, and I know it, I used to live in Shelfleet for 10 years, very happily. The one shop is a very nice farm shop, but most people go there for add-ons, as it were, to their weekly or however often one goes to the supermarket. Now, to go to the supermarket, the nearest supermarket, do you agree, is in Freshwater? Freshwater is nearer than Newport. There's no supermarket in Yarmouth, if that's what you're considering. There's a little corner shop, but there's no big supermarket. So you have to go to Freshwater. Firm is about 5 miles, I would suggest, from Shelfleet.
Sorry, I will respond to the questions, but I feel they're getting slightly personal, so I just want to pull back.
I only said
if that's
well,
okay.
Oh, I see. Right, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to reveal that or in a personal way. I just thought that. So I apologise. I didn't mean to do that. So just continuing the point, it's about 5 miles distance. So to go for any shopping other than local farm shop, you'd have to travel 5 miles or thereabouts. And the way that you would do that if you went by bus would be, again, you'd walk all through the development, you then turn right, or you may decide to cross the road at that point. You then have to walk along the pavement for quite some way, and then you'd have to cross the road again, and then you'd have to take a bus which runs an hour. Crossing the A3054 twice is perhaps not very safe. I don't know if you agree. And also, it's unlikely that anyone would take such a convoluted route, is it not? You'd also have to take that convoluted route if you wanted to take a bus to the school.
If I may, I think these are possibly questions which may be difficult to answer in the sense that you're invoking a certain subjective determination as to whether that will be difficult. So all I'm simply saying is it may be more appropriate to reserve these points for the general discussion. I am certainly keen that we keep a
I would only
demarcation.
say, Chair, that this is a recommendation against the view and of Island Roads. And therefore, the planning officers have chosen, as it were, to say in terms that this is a sustainable development and that we should not follow the recommendation of Island Roads. I think it's reasonable to ask why the planning officers make that recommendation, and that's what I was trying to do.
I think that's fair in those terms, but I think we do need to be careful not to stray into asking officers for, as it were, a subjective determination that perhaps is outside of the factual issues. I think what will come down to a mooted debate between us is certainly valid, but I'm just keen that we do keep that demarcation. But Ms. Wilkinson, I don't know if you are able to offer any comment in relation to Councillor Spink's points. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I will offer comment, and then Mr. Bolton may wish to come in and add to that. So I think my comment in essence would be that the officer report covers the point in terms of how officers have considered the comments of Island Roads and how they consider that we have, in essence, tried to get the access to the school, and that hasn't been achievable because of third-party land. So the decision has to be made, and it is open to councillors to turn around and say, actually, that's fundamental to this application, the link to the school, and therefore it is unacceptable. Officers didn't consider that that link was fundamental to the acceptability of the scheme, having regard to the existing settlement of Shelfleet. And I think that is the answer to the remainder of the question, in that, yes, there is a bus stop, there's bus service every hour. Yes, there are challenges with the existing network. However, this is an existing village. It is an existing settlement. I am not going to sit here and suggest the existing settlement is completely unsustainable. There are people living in it. And it functions. It has a shop. It has basic facilities and needs. I would defy anyone, and this is personal opinion only, but I would defy anyone to find a village on the Isle of Wight where you have a supermarket close enough that you can walk there with ease that isn't a rural service centre or that isn't a smaller regeneration area. There are smaller villages which are still self-sufficient, and it has what you require for your basic day-to-day needs. We are a rural island, and therefore officers are satisfied Shelfleet is a sustainable village, it's a sustainable settlement, it exists, and therefore it is sustainable and appropriate to increase housing at its edges. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson. No, in which case we'll turn to Mr. Councillor Price. Apologies, Councillor Price. Your question, you've been waiting very patiently. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not going to repeat any of the issues that have already been, or questions that have already been asked, but I don't think there's any doubt that we can all see that this development is intrinsically linked to the existing Burke Close development, regardless of who the developer is going to be. And I know I'm going to get told off for asking this question, so I apologise in advance. But how did we end up in a situation where we've got what someone referred to as a blight on the landscape at Shelfleet? I voted against that application when it came to this committee last time for a number of reasons, which I'll go into when we get to the debate. And the absolute priority of that is linking any development to the school. But the how did we end up in a situation where the developer has basically run roughshod over the planning process, built what they want using the materials that weren't approved, and we're now in a situation where you've got a built out development filled up with people that need those houses and live in them quite happily, but it wasn't what was approved and the landscaping was never done. And it does ruin the appearance of Shalfleet Village. It's really sad that we've ended up with that. And, you know, to have something else in front of us that could go the same way, with all the other issues that have been brought up, you know, really does concern me. So I'd be interested to have some feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. I certainly wouldn't seek to tell off any member of the planning committee, particularly given that many members are a lot more experienced than I. I'm simply trying to keep a clear demarcation, but I certainly take your point. And I think perhaps the question regarding enforcement is certainly a valid one. Just take advice for a moment. Ms. Wilkinson. Oh, I beg your pardon, Mr. Bolson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to pick up on a couple of points, of course, all members will be aware that we are here to discuss and consider the application in front of us, not anything that may have happened adjacent, no matter how valid some of those opinions may or may not be. Councillor Price, I think I would just highlight that at that time, and I'm not saying that we've got it right as an LPA in its entirety, but at that time, that scheme for all affordable housing came forward at a time that followed years of very little affordable housing across the island, and particularly in the West Wight. Whether that's sufficiently excusable factor, that's a matter for opinion, but that was the situation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Folger. Supplementary, Councillor Price.
Yeah, I just want to come back, and it's not a question, just to comment on that. And I do absolutely respect that, and I totally understand what it has delivered. And I would comment that, you know, if this was in Newport, I think the local members in Newport would be watching a development like this and making sure that the design code and the built out materials were being followed. So through enforcement, obviously.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Cox.
My question refers to the ancient woodland known as Pond Close Copse and the extenuation pond. Now, according to what I've read, it says that nothing should be inside that buffer zone, but in the paperwork that you gave and the picture you displayed today, the extenuation pond is still within the 15-metre buffer zone, and therefore that would seem to be contrary to what I have read in the NPPF. I'm a simple person, don't confuse me. And also, it also says that the majority of the surface water will go to that pond and then be dispersed southwest, I believe it says, of the site. And I wondered whether spilling all of that surface water to that area would have a negative impact on the ancient woodland, which is protected.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Ms. Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the ancient semi-woodland buffer zone, that is an area that is set aside in essence for landscaping. So it's to protect the integrity of the ancient semi-woodland by taking development kind of out of it. And then it is planted in essence. There is, you are correct, a small section of the attenuation pond which is shown to go into that buffer zone. It would obviously be constructed, and I believe it's covered by a condition in order to ensure that there is no excavation work within the root protection areas of the trees or any of the additional planting as part of that buffer zone. So it is proposed to be designed so it doesn't impact on it. But I've got the report stipulates in 7.102 that revised plans have been provided to show the pond moved further from the ancient woodland to comply with the requirements of the 15-metre buffer. So I would suggest that although it's shown to be inside what is the parameter of the buffer, it's not within 15 metres of the ancient semi-woodland, but that would be covered as part of the condition compliance to ensure that it's not within that area. And there is sufficient space to ensure that if it needs to kind of be tweaked, it wouldn't sit within that area. In terms of the outflow, the proposal would retain the existing Greenfield runoff rate flow, so the litres per second going into the stream. And so as a result, there would be no additional flow to impact on the ancient semi-woodland by going in that direction from the pond. In essence, there's a hydro break in the pond that would control that flow and that outfall, which would ensure that it wouldn't be more than the existing, which in order to ensure that there wouldn't be any impact from the surface water drainage to the HSME woodland.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Supplementary, Councillor Cox.
Yes, so it says most of the water on the site will now go to that pond and then go to the southwest where it will be distilled. At the moment, most of the water does not go there. So there would be an increase of water that would be going into the brook, because one would assume naturally the water would disperse in a 360-degree way because it's quite a flat site. And my other question, my supplementary question is that when we were there, the site was waterlogged. And although they are going to keep the litres per second very similar, I'm wondering if they could slow it down further, because clearly there is a problem with surface water there and flooding. And we talk about a 1 in 100 water event. That seems to be pretty frequent now, and most of the roads are flooded. So would it be possible to condition that the flow rate be further reduced?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor. I think the challenge in essence is to establish what would be an appropriate reduction to that flow rate. In the established principle is that you retain the Greenfield runoff rate. The reason why that's in essence an established principle is that there needs to be some flow of water in streams. So to slow it down too much, you affect the natural progression. As the report stipulates, there is very bad poor infiltration on this site. Which is why the site appeared waterlogged, or the site was waterlogged at the time of the visit. There is poor infiltration. So actually by incorporating a surface water system into the site and utilising both the pond and crate storage, you actually allow for better infiltration, because you're taking that water out and you are storing it to then release it. So it would result in effectively an improvement to this current situation where the infiltration doesn't happen, because it would allow for that water to be moved through the site or held if it was necessary or appropriate.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair. As we all know, one of the priorities of this council is the delivery of affordable housing to rent. And unsurprisingly, I have a question about that. I haven't read the report in as much detail as usual, because I was in the Northeast for a funeral over the weekend, so I pretty much scanned it. But I'm just interested in the light of what one of the objectors said. As usual, we had the comments about affordability to purchase, which is not really what our priority is. Our priority is delivering housing that is affordable to rent through the only methodology that exists at the moment, so long as we don't have council housing or housing associations building well. And that is through private developments and getting our cut of that 35%. Now, there's certainly 35% here, but I don't see any mix of tenure here that satisfies me. I would obviously want to be sure that 70% of the 27 homes were affordable to rent, nothing else. And secondly, I don't see any reference to who's going to manage any affordable preferences here, which is quite unusual, Sarah. Normally there's the immortal word, not immortal words, but the standard words, you know, registered housing provider, or even the name of a housing association. There's no mention there, which makes me very suspicious. Apart from all of that, you know, and I'll make a contribution later on about the sustainability of this development, but if we could just clarify those things for me, because as you know, it's always a key issue for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in essence, those elements would be determined through the legal agreement and would be set out within the terms of the legal agreement. And our starting point would always be the 70-30% rent split as set out in the core strategy. If councillors wish us to be specific on that and that not be a starting point for negotiation and say that it must be 70-30 rent split, we can ensure that that goes away and it is in the legal agreement. In terms of the provider, what we have tended to do with recent sites in relation to affordable housing is not stipulate it must be a housing association or a registered provider, because we, as you know, have a number of companies on the island, housing developers, who provide their own affordable housing, become their own affordable housing provider. And therefore, the requirements within the 106 would require, in essence, an affordable housing scheme to be submitted, which would provide the split between 70-30, and that it would be required to identify the provider of affordable housing. And that is how it would be worded. So they would have to be provided by a provider of affordable housing. It wouldn't be a registered provider, but a provider of affordable housing, and we would have to be told who that is. And that would be within the terms of the agreement.
Ready.
Thank you, Chair. Supplementary, and thanks for that, Sarah, but it concerns me that we're increasingly going down this road of, you know, anybody's just creating a housing company and saying they're going to do affordable for rent. What guarantees have we actually got? I mean, if you put down there, I mean, I have my issues with housing associations, but I know that fundamentally they will manage their properties reasonably well, not as well as they should, reasonably well. You know, that people have a level of security of tenure. I'm not certain, you know, that these sort of vague arrangements, you know, now that's not criticism of the negotiations that you're involved in, but, you know, these sort of vague arrangements are satisfying my desire to see secure, affordable housing for rent that is well managed. Now, can you give me any guarantees, or is it just something we're going to accept that this is until we have a change of government, hopefully that'll deliver proper social housing, you know, sometime when the pigs fly by the window, you know, until then, I'm just going to have to accept this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brady. Mrs Wilkinson.
Thanks, Chairman. We probably my answer to that is we do what we can within the parameters of planning. So we would ensure that the legal agreement required them to be affordable rent in perpetuity. We would require that, subject to them being Rent Plus, and then they're not, as you're aware, which are considered by the council as affordable rent. And then we would ensure that there was a management that the affordable housing provider appropriately managed those units. That is obviously a legal agreement. We don't do it via condition. It is a legal agreement, so there is a legal obligation for that to be complied with. In terms of the necessity for us to do that, falls on the basic fact that we simply can't attract enough registered providers to the island. We don't have enough registered providers to meet our needs, so we have to look to those private organisations to provide it. But I don't dispute it's not ideal. We do what we can to ensure that they are managed appropriately through the legal agreement, and caveats within that would be that an affordable a registered provider would be subject to the same requirements and caveats.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Are there any additional questions? Councillor Jones-Evans, followed by Councillor Church.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a bit of clarification regarding the back reports that Councillor Spink brought up. I've gone, my computer's working, by the way, so I'm very lucky, Councillor Spink. And I've gone both back reports, one in May and one in September, and they both say within 24 months of the date. So I don't know which one you were looking at, Councillor Spink. Perhaps you could let me know. Because I've read both back reports, they both say 24 months, as Ms Wilkinson said.
Thank you for clarifying that. It's quite frustrating because I usually, as it were, look at my computer and double check things, but I'm not able to do so. But I will send you an email to that effect.
Thank you, Councillor Jones-Evans. Councillor Churchman.
Yes, I have a query about parking and garages. Looking at your very pretty map, and one thing that does worry me when we build estates, I know roads have to be of a certain width, but if there isn't enough garaging spaces for these houses, what happens is we end up with cars parked on the pavements. So is there a way we can address this? But certainly, looking at this map, how many parking spaces per dwelling, please, Chair?
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. If I draw members' attention to 7.126, 7.126, yeah, sorry, apologies, of the report, it does stipulate that the number of parking spaces are in compliance with the council's parking guidelines as part of the number of units that have to be set out. That parking provision is set out in 7.121, which stipulates the number of spaces that are required to be provided as part of the development. The application complies with that.
Supplementary. Right, I think perhaps now it is an opportune moment to open up to wider debate, given your segue, Councillor Churchman. So I don't know if anybody wishes to speak first in relation to the general issues already covered. Who wants to commence? Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I'll just go straight into the bit that I'm going to talk about, which is the connection to the school. I'll declare an interest because I have a child at Shalfleet School, and I had my other child at Shalfleet School, and have been travelling to that school for nearly 12 years now. That school is oversubscribed always. It's currently got around 210 pupils there, plus a preschool. There is virtually no way you can walk to the school. There's a number of ways you can get to the school. There is a car park opposite next to Horse and Groom that you can park in and cross the road. Unfortunately, there's no footpath that links the car park to the road network, so you have to walk across a muddy verge, then walk through a pub car park, which can be often a bit dangerous. Then there is what was a welcome introduction of a pedestrian crossing to safely cross the road. I say safely, but no one adheres to the speed limit there, nor do they often stop at the red light. But the school runs a drop-off and collection process, which is very effective. I help there 2 days a week, actually. To say that it is probably the best I've seen would be an understatement. I think every school could learn from that. However, not every school has no other way of getting to it except by car, which is pretty much the case with Shalfleet School, other than a few houses along Station Road. You know, there is no safe way to walk to that school at all, other than if you are walking from the Horse and Groom. That's pretty much or from Roger Hanley fencing. They're the only places you can walk to that school safely. And so going back to Burke Close, for instance, the bus arrives 20 minutes after the school registration in the morning. You could say, well, if the bus service was changed, a child could get on that bus and go to school. But these are primary school children. They don't go to school on their own. They are accompanied by an adult. Many of them will be eligible for school transport through the council, which will mean that a minibus or taxi will come and get them. To drive them 700 metres to school, it is utterly bonkers that we would even consider approving 70 houses and not connecting that housing development to the local school. It would be absolutely mental for us to do that. Okay. Now I understand the gentleman said, oh, we've tried, we've negotiated, well, that's actually not our concern. If we say that there must be a sustainable link for pedestrians and cyclists to the school, the local school, then that is within the gift of this committee. Now, whether the developer delivers it or not is entirely irrelevant. Now, you could say that that puts this scheme in jeopardy. Well, you know, if this was refused on that basis, I would hazard a guess that the planning inspectorate would look at it and say, well, there's no sustainable link to the local school 700 metres away. It's 704 metres because I've actually measured it. So, and I can assure you that is correct. There's often a parking enforcement officer at the school site at drop off and collection because there are so many cars trying to get in and out of the site to do the drop off, which works brilliantly and it's actually pretty safe. But then you have a parking enforcement officer stopping people parking on the little bits of W line in and out of the school that you're not allowed to, but there's no other way you can do it. All we're going to do is make it worse. Now, like I say, there's 210 pupils at that, roughly 210 pupils at the school, plus the preschool. If you said that half of those have a sibling, that's a good 140 cars arriving and disembarking in the morning and in the afternoon. We're looking to approve a scheme for 70 houses that could feed children to that school for the future, which will help the school be sustainable in the future as the pupil numbers drop. I'm aware of all that. It's a rural school and it needs children to be able to survive. But we're looking to do that without connecting the site to the school. It would be absolutely crazy to do that. And I really, whatever the justification is for it, I cannot vote for 70 houses, 700 metres from a school site and not put a safe, sustainable route to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Does anyone wish to speak? Councillor Critchison, followed by Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I agree with Councillor Price. This is a development in a wider rural area. And if we're not putting in the sustainable links to encourage those rural areas to be able to be sort of self-sufficient on a wider scale and a longer term, then we shouldn't be approving those applications. I don't think it does positively conserve or enhance the character of the area without bringing something that the area desperately needs, and the school really does need to have a longer term to it. And there is the sustainability concerns as well with the travel, but with the environmental harm and the woodland and the brook, I can't see many positives to this, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Critchison. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you. I've listened to this evening's proceedings with great interest, and I'm slightly perplexed about the word sustainability that's been talked about, because if I was to listen to local member and the jury member in their purest form, it's saying we can't have any more houses and our area, our village is not going to be sustainable in the long run. And I get really confused about that because we get a lot of housing gets shoved in Newport, but no one talks about the smells we have to put up, the noise we have to put up, the dangerous routes to school we have to put up. Never hear any of that at all. But when it's in a rural setting, village setting, which we're trying to obviously create longevity for these important areas of the island, to allow families to move in, to have that vibrancy, otherwise they're just going to wither on the vine. I find it really confusing. I find it very confusing, this message. So blue sustainable settlements, yes or no? No, nothing is perfect. I have to say, I do agree with Councillors Price and Critchison about the link to the school. That is perplexing because they are so near. However, there are other alternatives to this. Schools, I understand, have green travel plans. Always did when I was a governor. If there's 140 pupils potentially from this settlement, I mean, that says to me a school bus could come in, a minibus from the school could come and collect the children. I mean, it sounds like there's lots of cars coming from all over the island to this school, so there's not actually room for local children anyway. So again, I'm really confused about the of course local school is important, but its link with the village, again, I'm sort of struggling with. So I think on balance, we do need housing. We need sustainable, long-term viability for our villages, and without putting housing in there, without putting housing in it, it's going to be affordable to people. I can't see how we're going to continue. It's going to be, everyone talks about brownfield all the time, but oh, hey ho, guess where the brownfield sites are? And you just put more and more strain into the urban settlements. You end up with bigger and bigger urban settlements, and you're going to end up with villages on the outside that might look pretty as you drive through them, but they'll have no vitality or vibrancy, no one really living there. So what do we want? You know, where we've got to strike a balance here, haven't we?
Thank you, Councillor Jones-Evans. Councillor Spink.
I'd just like to say that the concept of the island plan and our 2012 plan is still our current plan. The concept is that it actually wants development. The 2012 plan says that the majority of housing need will be met within settlement boundaries, and that the wider rural area, the plan says, and this is consistent with the NPPF, the national policy, the wider rural area development should satisfy a local need. And in addition to that, the NPPF says that, for example, rural exception sites, so I hope answering your question, Judy Jones-Evans, rural exception.
My question, I'm talking to the officers and everyone in general, don't need to respond to
No,
it
no, I
directly.
didn't say that. No, no. I'm saying I hope I'm answering your question. I'm trying to. So the rural development in rural areas is supposed to take place by rural exception sites. It's not me who lives in a rural area making this up. It's A, our 2012 plan, and it's B, the NPPF. Rural exception sites are normally, it says, and ideally small sites with a large proportion of affordable homes. In fact, it says ideally a high 100% affordable, although it says a certain amount of market value homes may be permitted in order to facilitate that. Now, that's the way, in answer to, in my submission, in answer to the point that Councillor Jones-Evans was making, as how do we develop small villages? That's the way to develop them, with sites of, say, 15 houses, the vast majority for affordable rent. What local areas are finding is that they've got an enormous quantity of the over 60s, and they can't get anyone to do jobs. I mean, most of those people are retired. There's no one now. So in Shelfleet, the village pub, which is the New Inn, that's closed. It also, the whole concept of the NPPF, public planning policy, is that rural developments must be sustainable. And it's a matter of policy that if they increase the use of the motor car, they should not be granted. Now, it's absolutely the case that this will increase the use of the motor car. I mean, the nearest doctor's surgery is in Freshwater, 5 miles away. You've heard of the difficulty of walking in the road to get to the bus stop. It will undoubtedly increase the use of the motor car. And Island Roads have noticed that and have recommended refusal. Are we going, there should be, in my view, compelling circumstances to go against the recommendation of Island Roads. As far as the so-called affordable housing is concerned, the proposal in the recommendation is that it should be offered to island people for 3 months and thereafter on the mainland. Now, if there's such a need for people to come and live in Shelfleet, why don't we just take that off? I mean, I just don't understand the logic in this. We are building houses. It will have not much benefit to islanders. They're not sustainable. They will increase the use of the motor car. They can't get to the school. And the affordable housing, the last allocation the applicant has said, and it's the same applicant, the applicant has said that there was an enormous demand in Shelfleet. Well, in the last application, from memory, the housing for rent was either 3 or 4 local people. And I think, if I'm right, I think it was either 10 houses or 14. It was 24 in total. I got that from a Freedom of Information application about 3 years ago. I asked the housing provider in the same application to be told what the other houses went for, which are shared ownership, and my application was refused. I asked whether it went to local people. They refused my application. Why are we granting these developments? It just seems to me to be ludicrous. I want to help to solve the housing problem on the island. I just can't see how developments like this achieve it.
Thank you, Councillor Spear. I may well bring you back, and I don't wish to curtail the debate, but I think it is important. It's certainly balanced. I know that Councillor Price and Councillor Stewart are waiting, but thank you. Councillor Stewart, Councillor Price, then Councillor Brodie. Councillor Stewart.
Well, first of all, thank you to the officers. It is clear, having gone through this, they spent an enormous amount of time trying to make sure that this is an awful lot better than what is actually there at the moment. And more to the point, actually, for once, I kept quiet for as long as possible. And I'm very grateful to fellow councillors because they have made some extremely important points, some of which I would make, but I'm not going to. However, there are to go to rural exceptional housing and also community housing. It's worth mentioning that Shelfleet Parish Council, who are represented here, have actually been pushing a local site which is of 12 houses. There is no doubt, and I know that this has come up recently at council, that that is one of the ways forward. And rural exceptional housing, for instance, in Norfolk has been particularly successful. So certainly something which we should consider generally as a committee as something which is the way forward. Affordable housing is absolutely critical. I welcome Councillor Brodie's input and insistence on that. It is important that we have that all the time. We've talked about sustainability. There's sustainability into the village, which isn't. And we have talked about sustainability to the school, which clearly isn't. And to my bête noire. And I'm always going to mention this because ancient woodland. I've spent quite some time looking at this further to polish up my knowledge already. I believe that 50-metre buffer zone, as per the House of Lords, is probably an acceptable approach. I note that the Woodland Trust in here pleaded for a 30-metre buffer zone. I am only too aware that the current guidance says 15 metres is acceptable. I am aware that other local authorities do insist on much wider buffer zones. I would recommend that we consider as a committee whether we should take that view. As I said in a previous meeting, I'm prepared to accept that 30 metres might be the only best we can get at the moment, but I would recommend that to fellow councillors. Otherwise, I will listen very carefully to everything else said, and I am grateful for everybody's input so far. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor Price, followed by Councillor Brodie. Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just to come back on, I want to make it clear that I'm not actually against the development per se. I think it doesn't do enough to, which I'm sure Councillor Brodie's going to hit on, it doesn't do enough to fulfil the affordable rent. But the affordable to purchase is very relevant, as we heard from one of the speakers, that often these developments are happening in these rural areas and some of the more affluent areas where you have generations that have to move out of the area and can never come back. And it's really sad to hear that, but sadly it's something that happens. And I wonder what we can do to help address that with the affordable to purchase. But the other issue I wanted to bring up was about the highway flooding. Now, I drove to Shelfleet before I came here today, and it had only rained just for half an hour at that point. And the road outside this site was completely flooded. I had to actually drive through water that deep. And it's clearly running off the field that's also within the applicant's ownership. you know, I understand that this may address some of that, some of the drainage scheme may address some of that. But what guarantees is there that it will address that? And that's without looking what could happen down in the hollow, as another speaker mentioned. You know, this is actually on at the top of the hill, really, effectively. That's where it floods at the moment, and it's flooded this afternoon. So I just wonder, you know, what comfort can we take in the drainage scheme to prevent that happening in future? But like I say, I wanted to say that my opinion on this is very much relating to the fact that Burt Close is really actually quite successful development, other than how it looks, because you know, I know there's many of the children that attend the local school that live in Burt Close. But again, I go back to the fact, and I'm sorry to repeat myself, but they have to drive there 700 metres. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Brodie.
Thank you, Chair. And once again, we have this discussion about who prioritises homes for people, roofs over people, or who prioritises areas of the island to be kept exclusive to people who need homes. And I'm on the opposite side from a lot of the speakers tonight, except for Councillor Jones-Evans. The fact of the matter is we have an obscenely long housing register, housing needs register, a number of families in homeless accommodation, temporary accommodation. And as I said earlier, the only way to deliver affordable housing for rent is under the current model. There is no other model. This is the one. In my view, provided you can get round the sustainability argument, you have to support affordable rented housing development. And that's the expectation of government. And there are paragraphs after paragraphs arguing that we're still subject to the presumption in favour of sustainable development. I would just refer people to, if you go around many of the villages on the island that used to be covered by the former Isle of Wight Rural District Council, you will find former council houses, delightful houses, opposite the shop in Shalfleet, as I recall. There's a row of them, delightful houses. I cycle all around the West Wight. You know, I know I'm Newport through and through. But I cycle around. I went down Warlands Lane recently to have a look at this site. And you find these that were sadly bought under right to buy legislation and have been lost to ordinary people ever since. The worst policy mistake of any government in the post-war era was that policy. And I just sometimes feel that there's this feeling that a lot of people who live in villages pleased that happened, because nice people from the mainland and on the island have bought those houses up, or they're still living in the ones that they bought themselves. And Councillor Price referred to Burt Close. You know, he voted against it, despite the fact, and we've seen it as one of the paragraphs in here, I mean, the demand for the properties there was overwhelming. And again, we will have around about 20 homes affordable to rent here. And I can guarantee you that there will be overwhelming demand for them, even though perhaps the majority of those people won't want to live in Shalfleet, just as probably the majority of people didn't want to live in Shalfleet, because it's the difference between having a roof, a secure roof over your head, and nothing. The school, well, it's interesting that a Newport councillor, a resident of Newport, is such an advocate for Shalfleet Primary School, which is in Ningwood. And I wonder how many of the children at Ningwood, Shalfleet Primary School actually come from Shalfleet. I guess probably not a high percentage of them, but I mean, I'm happy to be corrected, Councillor Price. And that the motor car will always be used in those situations, because I believe it's a good school. I don't know what Ofsted rating is of it. I believe it's probably a good school, and parents shop around now for best schools for their children, and I understand why people do that. The island planning strategy, I'm sick of hearing about it, to be honest. People's quoted it to me. I haven't agreed to it. Doesn't count for, I guarantee I won't be voting for it as it stands. I know my vote doesn't count for much at all on that, but I think it's a load of rubbish. Right, I'd rather stick with what we've got at the moment, which is still extant for at least the next couple of years, and get the island planning strategy correct. And let's see what happens when hopefully we have a change of government and hopefully a change in attitudes to housing delivery in this country. Sustainability, as Miss Wilkinson said, you know, if you live in a rural area, the likelihood, except maybe I'm perhaps thinking of Knighton, where Councillor Critchison lives, you know, that access to a GP is some way away. Access to the supermarket is some way away. Not all of them have a good convenience store like they do in Knighton. How many villages are actually sustainable? All the people who live in Shalfleet now, why aren't they all moving? Why are they moving if it's so unsustainable? Of course they're not, because they want to live there. So I don't accept a lot of these arguments. And I know there are 5 letters for a lot of these. I'm not going to repeat them, but it begins with N. The bottom line is I will only ever be interested on this committee, provided it is sustainable in delivering homes for people, to the 2,500 people on our housing needs register. This is a step towards that. And therefore, Chair, I would like to propose, and I suspect it's probably a vain attempt, propose that we accept the recommendation of the officers on this application, that we approve it, subject to the provision of at least 70% affordable housing for rent.
In perpetuity.
In perpetuity. Thank you, Debbie. I'd like to propose that, Chair. I'll look for a seconder. I suspect it'll go down in flames, but I think we need to have that vote. Then we will move on to the refusal vote, no doubt, which will be a named vote. Once again, we will note the same names that consistently vote against homes for island people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. And I believe, Councillor Andre, you're seconding Councillor Brodie's motion to approve this with the stipulation regarding 70% affordable rented accommodation. In perpetuity, certainly. I will, however, I know there is a motion which has been seconded, but I'm going to bring Councillor Jones-Evans in to speak. Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you. I wanted to ask our proposer and seconder of that motion, which I'm happy to support as well, if they'll consider the condition that I mentioned earlier regarding the design and the condition, talk about the render. You know, I'm not the arbiter of style, but I do find it a little odd in this setting that you would have a mixture of 4 materials. And I personally think, and you know, if officers agree with me that that would be a better way forward, I would like to lose that element if that's agreeable.
Yeah, Chair, I'm aware that Councillor Jones-Evans has had a thing about rendering all the time I've known her on this council, and yeah, I entirely accept that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I also accept that.
I have Councillor Churchman and Councillor Price to speak. I am conscious, however, we're coming up to the 2-hour mark on this application, so I certainly would urge a degree of brevity to move towards the motion that is on the floor, as it were. Councillor Churchman, followed by Councillor Price.
Yes, much to my surprise, I'm completely torn about this. I would point out that Shalfleet is a 1-form entry school, so it only needs 30 children in reception per year, which they obviously cope with. I wish some of them would come to Haylands, where we are undersubscribed. The more concrete you lay, the greater the runoff into tiny, unfortunately archaic sewers, pipes, etc. I was married to a chartered surveyor, and I'm still very concerned about the runoff, etc. from this site. I think we're heading for trouble. I understand that you will try and control it, but I really have a big question mark about that. Where are the jobs for all these people who are going to live in these 70 houses? This is the West Wight, which unfortunately, when I first came to the Isle of Wight, to go to the West Wight was an overnight job. To go to Newport was a lunch job. We're very parochial, and I have islanditis now as well. So where are these people going to work and find jobs? It obviously means lots of car journeys, and we're trying to stop that sort of thing. It seems an awful shame to build on such a lovely greenfield site when I can think of loads of places where even if it was greenfield, it wouldn't be so nice. We've got some pretty derelict bits around the Isle of Wight, which rather than choosing this particular one, I think, as I said, the sustainability, well, we have deliveries from places like Morrison's, etc. So I'm now almost arguing against myself because we can get deliveries from supermarkets all the time now. And that does cut down the problem of how you live. I think my biggest problem of all is that I just can't see young people affording these houses. And to me, this is my biggest bugbear. If you're going to say we're going to build 70 council houses there, I might be a Conservative, but I'd be saying yippee, because then we really are talking about solving the housing problem on the island and anywhere else in this country. But that is not going to happen. And as I said, I still wonder how many of them will go to the people who really need them. Solar panels, heat pumps. I cannot understand why, as far as I know, we're the only country in Europe that doesn't insist on solar panels on all new build. I really don't understand that, but we as a council, I presume, can't enforce that anyway. So then, I think really that is, I'm also still concerned about the number of parking spaces, garages being supplied. I think we're going to end up, if it's passed through an estate, with cars parked on the pavements anywhere and everywhere, especially when people have visitors. And I think that always wrecks the view and beauty of places. I think my biggest problem at the end of the day is if we refuse this application, are we going to lose it on appeal? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. I have Councillor Price followed by Councillor Andre. Councillor Price.
Actually, that's a concern to me, that, you know, it's easy to just vote against something and then the planning inspectorate will overturn that decision anyway, if we're not careful. I wonder if the proposer and the seconder would consider building into their proposal a safe route to the local school. That's my sticking point. That's my red line. Thank you.
Thank you. I see from in the, I'm just going to defer to Ms Wilkinson, but Ms Wilkinson now.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate this is a question between councillors in essence, and it is up to you, but I did want to just highlight, because it hasn't been mentioned in debate or discussion that was referenced in public speaking, that together with the proposal for the route slightly further along down to footpath 13 that I referenced, there is also a proposed contribution of £70,000 towards an investigation into providing that route. At the moment, we are aware there is a section of third-party land that we cannot get over. The owners are saying, no, you're not coming through my land. So the discussions have been had, but a significant contribution is being proposed as part of this application to facilitate either investigations into that route to get as far as we possibly can, or to alternative improvements and provisions of the rights of way network in and around this site. So I just want to kind of highlight that, because I haven't responded in that regard before, and I think that's kind of worth noting. But I would say that from a planning perspective, we cannot put a condition on, a requirement on, to provide us a route to the school when we know categorically it's not possible to achieve because of third-party land, and where those landowners have stated no. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. I have Councillor Andre followed by Councillor Spink. Councillor Andre. Councillor Berry, yes.
Just to accept, I wouldn't accept that amendment because it will It's effectively a wrecking amendment. Can I just say that, you know, and I know it sounds personal, but Matthew is a governor of a school in my ward where everybody practically can walk to school. And I would just ask Councillor Price, how many cars appear outside Barton Primary School every morning and every afternoon? And do you really believe that you're going to drive people out of their motor cars in Shalfley or Pan, right? Unless you take the cars off them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brody. Councillor Andre, followed by Councillor Price.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to pick up on a point that that Councillor Churchman raised. Now, I'm looking at the application in front of me, but I still think it's important to consider it as a contribution to the housing supply of the island. And I think there seems to be a tendency when we are considering applications and we're considering the element of affordable housing, which is something that is very much part of my view about providing affordable housing, that every development that we look at, it's almost as if it should be available to first-time buyers. If we look at it as part of the overall housing supply, I think that is useful in terms of the affordable aspect, because we have people at all levels that are looking for properties, and I just think that's an element of this. But I just like, so it's not just about the first time buyers or first time renters even. I know, and I very much support Councillor Brody in his wanting to get affordable rent. So it's part of that moving up, that if properties are released, people can move into such other properties. It's part of the overall housing supply, and I think it's important to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. With Councillor Spinks indulgence, I'm going to bring in Councillor Councillor Price, I should say, just to respond to the point that Councillor Brody's made. I think he has a right to reply, and then I will revert to you, Councillor Spink.
Yeah, I mean, I take on board what Councillor Brody's saying, but having been a governor at Barton Primary School in its old site and its current site for 11 years now, I can tell there's people that travel to Newport to work and take their children to Barton Primary School. It's not just local people that take their children to that school, just like it's not local people go to Shalfleet. I've got my own reasons for going to Shalfleet, and it's actually nothing really to do with the quality of the school. I hoped to move there, and oddly enough, I couldn't afford to at the time. But now my children are there. I've seen it through, and I like to feel that I've contributed to the community out there. But that's still irrelevant when it comes to this decision, because I voted against the previous application because I just could not understand why we would build houses so close to a school and just not find a way to create a safe route. How many times I need to say it, I don't know. But it's, you know, and it could be said that would jeopardize this development. But there's always a way. There's another way to solve this. So surely it's not down to me to design that or find that way. But there's multiple landowners around there. There's multiple ways to solve it. It doesn't have to be a direct route doing those 700 meters straight to the school entrance. There's other ways to do it. You know, that's for the developer to decide how to do it and come up with a scheme to deliver that. But again, my response is that saying that children shouldn't be able to walk 700 meters to school from when they live is completely wrong. Sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Price. Councillor Spink, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be very brief, but on the point of an appeal, I don't claim to be an expert, but I have read, try and read as many of the inspector's appeals as possible. And one of the most common in the reports that I've read, reason for an inspector upholding a refusal is because the development is not sustainable. And sustainable includes whether or not it will increase the use of the motor car. I mean, it may be, as Councillor Brodie says, a fact of life that people will continue to use motor cars, but the NPPF says that it should not be granted if it will increase or it were the use of the motor car. So, and the other basis on which the inspector tends to support refusals if it will do harm to the environment. Now, we didn't have a statement by the AONB, but there is a statement from the National Trust. The National Trust say, which I'm not saying is not in keeping with the area, and it will, and they're concerned that it will increase the sewage overflows into Newtown Creek. Now, that's not just a luxury. I mean, that's part of our heritage and part of our environment. Newtown Creek, I know Newtown Creek well, is fast becoming an appalling mess. Not only is that environmentally harmful, but it's harmful to the tourist economy of the West Wight. And many people who have limited income, West Wight isn't full of wealthy people living in castles. Many people who have limited income let out a room or two to sustainable tourists. They don't want to backpack round housing estates. They don't want to go to Newtown Creek and see it full of sewage. They don't want to go to Shellfleet and, as we've heard, see sewage in the high street. And we will decimate our tourist industry. People come to the island because it's different to the mainland. And what this is a mainland type of development taking place on the island in a rural area where the NPPF says it shouldn't be supported. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. I shall exercise my prerogative and go to the vote. We do have a motion before us proposed by Councillor Brodie, seconded by Councillor Andre to approve this application with particular conditioning regarding the 70%. Councillor Brodie.
Just very quickly, I think under the rules of debate, I'd normally have a quick right of reply. I'd just like to reply very quickly. And I would just remind every member of this committee, 2,500 people on the housing needs register. People in caravans, people in grotty B&Bs, people in terrible housing conditions. Just remember those people, and I haven't heard a single person who's an objector placing any emphasis on the plight of those people. I think they should hang their heads in shame. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brodie. We go to the vote. The proposal that has been proposed by Councillor Brodie, seconded by Councillor Andre, is to approve this application. All those in favour of approval?
1, 2, 3, 4.
And against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Abstentions?
None.
Well, myself, but simply to clarify for members of the public, as chair, I've taken the decision to follow the precedent set by my forebear in relation to not voting on matters, simply to enjoy a certain level of objectivity in these sometimes quite frenetic debates.
Chairman, can I just?
I'm going to bring in Mr. Gard and Councillor Brodie.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. In the event of a tie, as we have now, 4 votes for, 4 votes against and 1 abstention. Under the Council's procedure rules, Chairman, you have a second and casting vote on that motion. So I'd ask you now to confirm which way you're casting your second vote.
Thank you.
Before you move on, can I just point out that we've had a breach of the Planning Committee Code of Conduct yet again this evening, in that the local member has breached the convention long held, except broken on one occasion a couple of years ago by members of this committee. And the Councillor Nick Stewart, the local member, having spoken as the local member, having objected to the application, has now voted against this application as a member of the committee, thus placing you in the invidious position of having to have a cast-in vote. I just like to point that out. It should always be recorded. As a member of this council for a long time and a member of this committee for a long time, It has always been the convention, Councillor Stewart, that the local member does not vote on applications in their ward. I have always abided by it. I know most members of this council, I know Councillor Price would be one, Councillor Jones Evans, and Councillor Churchill. Members of this committee have been councillors for a long time, have always shown absolute decency over this. And I think it should be pointed out that Councillor Stewart has ignored the convention. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Stewart, do you wish to reply?
I thought I made it very clear when I spoke that I was speaking for the residents, and I listened very, very carefully as a member of this committee. Unless I have been misinformed, I am entirely and legally entitled to do that. I did not sit here as a committee member and make a decision. I spent 25 years in the civil service trying and succeeding being entirely dispassionate. I can wear two hats quite happily. If I am legally entitled to, I will carry on doing so.
Thank you. I'm keen to ensure that we don't allow this side issue to become the substantive matter before us.
Chair, it's not a side issue. This is a convention that is in the constitution of the Isle of Wight Council, of which there is a code of practice relating to planning committee membership. I've always adhered to it. A majority of members of this council have adhered to it. One or two members of the NIMBY, the Empyrean Islanders group, have ignored it. But now we have an example of a member of the Lib Dem group. I know the politics should be brought in here. The Liberal Democratic group, who are ignoring the constitution of the Isle of Wight Council, placing you in an invidious position.
Made, Councillor Brodin. I wanted to give Councillor Stewart a right of reply, but the point that I'm making is that the substantive issues on this agenda are the application. I'm just going to take some advice for a moment, and I shall revert to the councillors who have had their hands up. Thank you. So I shall exercise my casting vote. I appreciate that councillors Spink and Councillor Price have registered to speak, and I will certainly defer to them after so doing. I have decided that in balance, I am persuaded by the arguments in favour of approving this application, and I so vote, notwithstanding my initial position, which was made essentially to ensure the objectivity of this committee, which is a precedent which I will still cleave to because I think it is important. However, exercising my prerogative and my judgments, I feel that on balance this should be approved, and that is my casting vote. The motion is carried. We will move on. I think a comfort break of 10 minutes, so we will return at 23 minutes past. Thank you.
one.
Right, well, it's 23 past 6. I will call Planning Committee back to order, and we proceed with the second item on our agenda, which is application reference 23/01430/FUL. This is a hybrid application for full planning permission for proposed suitable alternative natural green space and means of access community car park, along with outline application for residential development and its means of access. The ward councillor is Councillor Paul Fuller, and the planning officer who will be presenting this matter is Miss Sarah Wilkinson. Ms. Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. Oh, I haven't shared my screen, apologies. The application site is an area of 17.9 hectares on the western side of Place Road. The point of the cursor is Place Road. The access comes off Place Road along Deauville Avenue to join with current Cordelia Gardens to access into the proposed site. For locational purposes, and they're also referred to in the report, to the north of the site you have Tattons Hill. At the point of the cursor, you have to the northwest is Hinton Road, to the west is Cockleton Lane. And this area that appears undeveloped as part of the application is a recently approved development off Place Road. Councillors, we walked through it during the site visit. We've also been there a number of times in conjunction with that application and other to look at the development itself. The application is a hybrid application, as stated by the description, which proposes outline consent for housing development, which would cover an area of 6.28 hectares. Of that 6.28 hectares, 2.56, apologies, is the existing road that runs along this point, and therefore the development area of the proposed housing element is 4.28 hectares only. With, as part of that outline, the only matter to be considered at this point is access. The area for that outline application is the area in red on the screen. The area in green is the proposed full application, which is for a SANG, or a suitable alternative natural green space. That covers an area of 11.06 hectares. As part of that application, there is also consent sought for a car park in conjunction with that SANG provision. I've incorporated an image of the development of the settlement boundary, knowing this is a point of debate in relation to this application. The settlement boundary runs along Place Road at this point. You can see Tuttons Hill's kind of in the middle here. So the settlement boundary runs along Place Road and then up in a loop and down again. The application site is in essence submitted somewhere along in approximately this location where it comes in. However, the access to the site itself does sit on Place Road. So the red line does abut the settlement boundary, although as members will note from the report, officers acknowledge that the built proportion of the site isn't that immediately adjacent to that settlement boundary. But I thought it was useful to incorporate a plan to show where the development sits in relation to between the two settlement boundaries in essence. I've incorporated some images that show the site and the surrounding area, this being Place Road, the upper images within that being the existing development that's recently been undertaken off Place Road, that the development would be accessed via. And then some of the surrounding area, including Cockleton Lane and the properties opposite, on the opposite side of Cockleton Lane. And then some images from in the site looking outward and through the site itself. The officer report references the visual impact assessment and the views taken from that visual impact assessment. Therefore, I thought it would be useful to incorporate these as part of the presentation. So I will slowly move through them. So councillors, you can look at them in turn. However, we were on site on Friday and we did drive around the immediate area to consider these views. Effectively, they are ordered. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. As stated, the application seeks consent for a hybrid with outline consent for residential development and full consent for the SANG. The members will note the area at the point of the cursor is the proposed residential area, which is proposed to be split into a number of different zones. Access would be from Cordelia Gardens at this point, and I will go into that in a bit more detail shortly. And then another access would be provided through to Zone D at this point between Zone E and D. With then to the north, you having the proposed access off Tuttons Hill for the car park and the SANG, the car park at the point of the cursor. Councillors will note a number of kind of lines running through the proposed SANG. Those are either pedestrian or multi-user routes. I will go into them in a bit more detail later, but if councillors can see them clearly enough, the grey are proposed to be pedestrian routes, with the pinky purple colour being the multi-user route, the key multi-user route that's referenced in the report, which runs from Cockleton Lane to incorporate Tuttons Hill to then come through onto Place Road. In essence, comes through at this point from Cockleton Lane. We drove past it during the site visit, up through the site to then join to Cordelia Gardens. But there's also another route coming from Tuttons Hill at the point of the access into the car park, which then again runs through the Sang and joins into Cordelia Gardens to provide that cycle link then through the cycle link that's been provided to the south of Deauville Avenue onto Place Road. Just looking briefly at the access onto Tuttons Hill, this is part of the full element of the application. There would be an access onto Tuttons Hill. This would be gated to ensure that the car park could not be used at night. And would incorporate a crossing point in the centre of the carriageway provided by a pedestrian refuge here. That would lead to an access road which would move through the beginning part of the Sang, which we stood in during the site visit, and up to a car park on a slightly flatter plateaued area. This is an image that probably better shows those routes that would run through the Sang and then connect to the development area as part of the residential element of the scheme. And I think, councillors, you should probably better be able to see those, the purple being the multi-user route and the orangey red being the pedestrian links through that area. I've also incorporated a plan showing the detailed landscape or the more detailed landscaping of the proposed Sang area, which would see a combination of features to provide interest within that landscape, as well as a number of pond features, which would have a multiple purpose, I should say, to be not only landscape features, but also provide biodiversity for wildlife, as well as drainage attenuation. As stated, the outline element of the scheme is for residential development that would be accessed off Cordelia Gardens at the point of the cursor, and then would come through into various zones of development. They would then pass through with an additional cut through the hedgerow and tree belt at this point to provide an additional access into Zone D. Councillors will note from the report references made to the potential impact on 77 Place Road. An update on that is provided as part of the update paper in front of you. Due to the removal of some trees, there is the potential for slightly greater impact on this property. However, officers are satisfied that as an outline application, that can be adequately mitigated, and the relationship between the existing 77 and the site a layout could ensure that there wouldn't be any unacceptable impacts on the amenity of that property. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. We move then now to the public speaking elements of this agenda item. I'd like to invite Sir Michael Rainey to speak for 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good afternoon, councillors. My name is Michael Rainey and I'm a long-term resident of Gurnard. I wish to speak to the policy issues on this site, and Mr. Salmon will speak on behalf of an adjoining owner. Your planning officer has set out the recommendation for conditional approval on a site that is contrary to the neighbourhood plan and contrary to the draft island planning strategy. Gurnard has a properly developed and approved neighbourhood plan, which was supported by a landscape character assessment carried out in compliance with national legislation. This identified 3 important areas of local landscape, apart from the sea, that define the settlement and that should be protected. These were the Jordan Valley to the east, the Luck Valley to the west, and the Gurnard Plateau to the south. I'm sure the planning officer can point these out to you if needed. This proposal occupies the plateau to the south, albeit with a Sang, which arguably does bring some long-term benefits, but also with around 117 houses which rise up to the ridge and indeed follow the high point 50-metre contour. These will dominate the ridge skyline and materially narrow the plateau at its central area. I want to read you an extract from the neighbourhood plan. The landscape assessment defined a settlement setting around the village, of which the plateau is a part, which needs to remain undeveloped in order to maintain a meaningful contribution to the settlement's existing character in the long term. And in relation to this proposal and the Gurnard Plateau, it said development of the Gurnard Plateau is possible because Gurnard is a hilltop settlement. However, The scale of development must be carefully restricted because of the important countryside buffer role which this area provides between Cowes, Northwood and Gurnard. The recently approved development to the west of Place Road, that is what is currently built, will have a major impact on the scale of development on the plateau because it significantly narrows the landscape buffer between Cowes and Gurnard. This housing proposal, in my view, will significantly narrow the remaining buffer between Gurnard and Northwood, spreading over halfway across the ridge. In December 2023, Michael Gove made the following statement in the House of Commons, setting out the NPPF guidance to the Levelling Up Bill. Local communities that have worked hard to put neighbourhood plans in place should not be penalised for the failure of their council to ensure an up-to-date local plan. The new NPPF therefore protects neighbourhood plans from speculative development for 2 to 5 years, where these plans allocate at least one housing site, which the Gurnard plan does. You can defer it for your planning officers to have a rethink, but I would urge you to defer it in line with the 2 to 5 years in the NPPF guidance while you get your new planning strategy adopted. Thank you.
Oh, there we go. Thank you, Mr. Rainey. I'd like to now invite Mr. Salmon to speak. Mr. Salmon.
I've been asked by the resident of Tutton Heights to highlight a number of concerns about this application as they impact him and other residents whose properties on Hilton Road back onto the proposed SANG. The Isle of Wight is unfortunately dependent on windfall sites for housing delivery, given that the council has not allocated any new sites for nearly 20 years. Identifying sites of development by the local planning authority is fundamental to the plan-led system. The 2012 core strategy has never Tutton Heights knows all too well that access onto it can be a highway safety challenge. More assurance is needed. Thirdly, the rear boundary of Tutton Heights is marked by free-flowing ditch that spills regularly during periods of rain. Drainage proposals for the SANG area need to be designed effectively to enable efficient, also environmentally sound surface water attenuation and drainage that does not worsen impacts for residents. Moreover, the design needs to improve the situation as a planning gain. Finally, there has to be assurance that the SANG actually adheres to aims of genuine habitat enhancement so that landscape amenity and biodiversity net gain are not lost in the push for housing delivery at all costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Salmon. I'd like to now invite Mr. Richard Hollis on behalf of Cowes Town Council, where he is the chair. And Mr. Hollis, you have 6 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Firstly, I'd like to deal with the SANG, which, for clarity, is already an open space. It is open farmland and good farmland. Being designated as grade 3, it should be retained as farmland. The report says that natural trees and vegetation would be planted, so for some, it will hide the built environment beyond. That would be, of course, for only 6 months of the year when in leaf. With it comes a car park. With a car park comes noise, litter, and sometimes antisocial behaviour. Yet the proposed SANG
is surrounded by the existing facilities of Gurnard and beyond, the sea, the beaches, and the myriad of existing footpaths and walks. Why have it? If built, who is going to maintain it? Who is going to clear the inevitable rubbish and dog's mess? Who's going to keep the grassland short and cut, maintain the paths, and ensure that the inevitable brambles do not take over? And be aware, unattended grassland near housing with water, the ponds, can be a haven for rats. At the public meeting at Gurnard Village Hall on the 27th of September last year, the applicants were asked who looks after their existing public areas of their developments. They said they had a special company to do it, but when asked to name the company, they were unable to even remember who the company was. A little worrying and perhaps a paper-thin concern. If the SANG goes ahead, who would police it and look after it? Who would pay for the work required? I hope it will not be left to the taxpayers. Furthermore, the access from Tuttons Hill is both steep and at times very muddy, with a watercourse running through it. And with global warming, winters seem to be getting wetter and more intense. I suggest that the application fails DM12 of the island plan, that's what it looks like, as the proposal fails to enhance and protect the existing landscape, destroying much of the loved open fields. If it were permitted, please remove all further development rights. Turning to the outline application to build 117 houses, residents have rightly shown great concern about building on greenfield land, joining cows to Gurnard by stealth on farmland in reality, outside the development boundary, not the sop that joins it onto the road. And the proposal is completely contrary to Gurnard's neighbourhood plan. The outline proposal on greenfield farmland is the very type of development that over years has been resisted and rejected on the island. There are acres of brownfield land, for example, around the prisons that should be used first and could be used for needed houses. It is not hard to see that this outline application fails DM2 of the island plan, as it does not protect or conserve our existing environment and is contrary to the spirit of SP1. Finally, infrastructure like medical facilities of cows are groaning at the seams and are on record as saying they cannot take on any more. We do not need to talk about the already, we do need to talk about the already inadequate sewage system, sadly, which at times gets significantly overloaded. It is just not good enough to say that Southern Water has to sort it out. Although some progress may have been made, sometimes the sewage system is still grossly overloaded, causing sewage spills into the sea in direct conflict with the well-being of all citizens, residents, and visitors. Any new substantial development will add sewage into the system. Only last week, you may have read, if you read The Guardian, that the Environment Agency told Oxford Council that the time had come to block, i.e. cease housing development in areas where the water companies were unable to cope with increased volume of sewage caused by more and more development. The situation is no different here. It is unacceptable to have the risk of pollution and the risk to public health until the water companies can genuinely sort out the problem. The environmental agencies say the new development should not go ahead. It is morally wrong to sleepwalk into a self-inflicted situation that would add sewage to the sewage problem. please reject these ill thought out applications. DM12, as the proposed SANG, fails to enhance and protect the existing landscape. And for the outline application, DM2, as it fails to conserve or protect our existing environment, natural and health-wise, and be mindful of the spirit of SP1, which requires the need to demonstrate no brownfield land is available.
Thank you, Councillor Hollis. We now turn to Mr. David Long, the agent. Mr. Long, you have 6 minutes.
Yep. Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I did have a pre-prepared speech, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to park that. I'm going to talk about things that the objectors have commented on, and I'm just going to turn to the application you guys just debated in Shelfleet to just draw some correlation. So just quickly, turning to Ms Wilkinson's reference to the settlement boundary, just to make absolutely clear, in policy terms, the settlement boundary in decision-making terms does not exist in the structure of where we are now with a now redundant island plan. So just keep that in mental note. The key decision for you, like with the Shelfleet one, is the presumption is triggered for sustainable development. The settlement boundary delineation, which was not debated in Shelfleet, does not exist. However, when turning to Mr. Rainey's comments about the neighbourhood plan, I find that in quite irony, because when I dealt with a small development and that was allocated by the neighbourhood plan by Gurnard, what did Gurnard Parish Council do? In their own neighbourhood plan, they objected to the same application that they voted for in the neighbourhood plan. How do we build housing when there is no stable platform to build it in policy terms? Secondly, Councillor Hollis raised a comment about how do people pick up dog poop and manage areas of grassland, etc., etc. Unfortunately, need to get up to standards. All of these structures are contained by rent charges by the residents. We had a calculation done by a local contracting firm. It would cost the residents on the site, it would pay for the whole management, sub £320 per year. Completely affordable, controlled, no money on the public purse. Brilliant. So when we turn to the debate about Shelfleet, why are we doing this development? We had a lot of debate about sustainability of footpaths, cycle routes, routes to schools, location of shops, where are people going to be employed? This application answers all of those without even any form of debate. When we look at your council's LC-WIP study, which is the local cycling infrastructure plan, what does it have in that very same plan? It's got route CW1, goes straight across the site. And what does it do? It wants to connect Cockleton Lane, Place Road, Tuttons Hill. Why? Because it makes the whole area more sustainable.
Yes, if I could, Councillor Spink, we do need to make sure that the speakers can speak uninterrupted, just to point that out. Thank you.
See if I can get a little bit more time in disruption.
Yes, yeah, certainly.
So anyway, we deliver the LC-WIP. In terms of Gurnard Neighbourhood Plan, what do they want in their policy T3? They want verbatim improve existing cycle and footpath network. Why? To improve the sustainability from both development and existing population. What are we trying to achieve? Going back to the principal test of the NPPF, approved development in the presumption where it is sustainable. So why have the applicants proposed to go for a zonal approach? And that wasn't just a quick fire range to get in housing in a certain area. It was modelled because their ambition to go carbon net zero. You would have gone to site and seen the houses that they're developing. You wouldn't realise that they're going for that standard because they're quite traditional and beautiful in their nature, which probably hopefully answers some of the debates you were having on Shelfleet. Just an example, some of their existing housing stock, and I don't know whether you're familiar with EPC ratings, but the current housing stock, which they're set to improve on, reaches an EPC rating of between 103 and 109. In EPC, it goes from G to A. Those 103 to 109 are A, and in the A grouping, it's classed to be very high. To put that into context, a house And a house now to build equates to about 6 tons of carbon. The development, it's 0.3 tons of carbon. All that, and the applicants are doing this because they don't have to, inflicted by any form of policy or building regulations, because they want to. So the next stage of their process in the development side is they're exploring how to achieve and get even better for net zero. And they have to do that through the architects, the engineers, the timber frame suppliers to get it all correct. And so that's the reason why we're going for that zonal approach. When we turn to the SANG is quite important because the SANG is held in perpetuity in Section 106 terms. It does seek to preserve the gap between Gurnard and Cowes. It does it in a respectful way. Some statistics in the officer's report talks about 65 structural parkland trees. We've got over 1,100 square metres of trees and scrub planting. We've got 5,000 square metres of wetland habitat. We could have just put a planning application in for the housing. We didn't need the SANG, but we're doing it for community benefit, to actually embrace people into an environment where they can actually benefit. Why wouldn't we do that? It's a good thing to do. From an ecology side, the Environment Act wants 10% of major developments, a 10% uplift over BNG. What does this development do? It exceeds that because that's what the applicants do. This development achieves over 20% on the grassland areas and over 10% on the hedgerow units. There is a considerable gain arising. Why? Because we want to. It's a good thing to do. So when we look at the project as a whole, it develops change. Yes, there will be change, but it's a positive one. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Before I bring in Councillor Paul Fuller, I'm going to suggest to committee that we have a continuation of 1 hour. Are there any objections? Splendid, we'll continue for 1 hour. Do we need? We do need to move to the vote, so in which case those in favour of continuation and against. Thank you. I will now turn to Councillor Paul Fuller. Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. Before I start as local member, I've been asked to write read a summary from the views from Gurnard Parish Council, which I'm chairman of. The Parish Council, in summary, has asked that the Parish Council has concerns regarding the SANG in that this area, that there will be a loss of wild green space to be replaced and developed into a cultivated area. That this is further loss of agricultural land. The Parish Council was very, very strongly opposed to the 20 space car park. It detracts from the sustainable objectives of green space. Now, we've heard how the developer is very, very pro green development, but they're looking to put a honking great 20 space car park in the middle of the SANG, which we feel is inappropriate, and it will urbanise this green space, which we oppose. In relation to the housing development itself, the Parish Council has concerns that this is loss of greenfield site. They say that brownfield sites should be considered before greenfield sites for housing development is a principle. The application is contrary to the Gurnard Neighbourhood Plan. There are policies within the Gurnard Neighbourhood Plan, such as Section E1, that states that any built development will be resisted in the Jordan Valley to maintain the openness of the green gap and prevent coalescence into Cowes. In the last 10 years, we've seen the gap between Cowes and Gurnard shrinking quite substantially, and that is a real concern of local residents. Section H1 states that residential development would be acceptable if it is located within the settlement boundary. Concerns have been raised, and despite the redrawing of the map to include Bidder Place Road, this is right in the middle of the settlement, the gap between Cowes and Gurnard, right in the middle. And that is of concern. There is a policy H1, that says that this is important to retain. There's concerns over the capacity to the existing highway infrastructure, concerns regarding the overcapacity in the existing sewage arrangements. Residents of Gurnard have huge concerns about sewage being pumped into Gurnard Bay. There's been a lot of concern raised lately about how Gurnard Bay has had sewage outfalls when sewage levels, when rain stormwater is prevalent, and that happens quite regularly in Gurnard. Concerns regarding the impact that this development will have on the lack of healthcare availability. Cowes Health Centre have made it quite clear in previous comments that they find it difficult to recruit, to be able to manage new residents to go into their medical centre, because they are the only medical centre in the Cowes area, and they are very limited on the amount of doctors, dentistry, which is non-existent locally in place. From my perspective as ward councillor, I would like to raise the impact upon the loss of the green space. Cowes, Gurnard and Northwood surrounds this area, and we are really concerned about the impact that this will have. In Cockerton Lane, we are concerned. Cockerton Lane is a very rural road. Residents, members of the planning committee would have visited Cockerton Lane. The concern that we have is that the ridges of the properties will be clearly visible from that rural setting, and we are concerned that that could not be overcome for at least 15 years, and particularly during the winter, the ridgeline will be visible as these properties are on the Gurnard Plateau. So no, Gurnard Neighbourhood Plan has referenced the importance of the boundary between Place Road and Cockerton Lane, referred to as the Jordan Valley, and it actually references the Gurnard Plateau, which Mr. Rainey raised just now. In addition, the Parish Council has asked for proposals over the future management of the Sang. How will this be afforded? We understand it's going to cost £300 a year. What is laudable from this application is that a third of the properties will be for affordable people, will be for affordable housing, and that is great. Affordable housing for rent. However, if you're living in an affordable housing for rent, do you really want to be burdened by that extra cost to maintain 13 hectares of Sang land, which this is part of? A lot of residents are concerned that this will make their affordable housing more expensive, and we would like that to be borne in mind. There are concerns about the loss of hedgerows and the wildlife corridors from the Gurnard Plateau. I know that there are works continuing with the developer to make sure that that protection of those hedgerows are strengthened, particularly around 77 Place Road, which I'm really pleased to hear, but also Hilton Road as well, where there will be quite a strong connection, and there are concerns regarding security for residents in Hilton Road. Also raised in the report, I've heard, oh, that's it, my time's up.
Thank you, Councillor.
But you get the gist. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the public speaking element of this agenda item. So we will move then to questions from members of the committee. Councillor Cox.
Local concerns are significant regarding the proposed 20-space car park within the Sang. The car park appears from the drawings to be away from local natural surveillance. The parish would prefer a smaller car park to be placed closer to and with access from Cordelia Gardens off Place Road. This would reduce any adverse impact on the Sang. More, if the committee is minded to allow the car park to remain in the proposed position, further clarification is required on the gate onto the Sang. The report mentions the gate will be locked daily. When and who will be responsible for this aspect of the application? Please could officers answer this question.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Mix Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. In essence, there will be effectively a site manager who will deal with the maintenance of the Sang and will be responsible for closing the gate every day. I've clarified that with the agent, as that was a question that I also had, and they've confirmed that there in essence would be, for want of a better term, a ranger who would manage the Sang, and they would be responsible for closing that gate at the end of the day to ensure that it was not available for access in the evenings.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Supplementary, Councillor Cox. In which case I will bring in Councillor Jones-Evans. I will revert back to you just in a matter of expediency, Councillor Jones-Evans.
Thank you. It's just a question regarding the sustainable transport and the LC Whip, Cowton Northwood. And has that been taken proper account of in this application?
Thank you. Ms Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chairman. I would draw councillors' attention to paragraph 7.92 through to paragraph 7.96 of the report, which identifies in what way, like the routes identified as part of the LC Whip for this area, and also the late reps paper, or the update paper, apologies, which updates that as the references in the report are solely to footpath links. Therefore, the update paper that you have on your desk, on your tables this evening, also incorporates the cycle length. What that shows is that as part of the application, one significant route that is identified as part of the SANG, which is between Cockerton Lane and Place Road, would be provided through the SANG itself, and that was the purple route as identified within the presentation, which is the substantive part of, it's in late breaths. So update paper, apologies, I want to say CC7, CC9, CC9. So a substantive part of CC9, and actually a route that the indicative cost within the LC Whip says will cost £210,000 would be provided through the SANG as part of this application.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkins. I hadn't actually managed to read the late reps paper on my desk, so that's really good to hear. I was also wanted just to tease out maybe that's so I'm not going to read it all now to waste your time, but it was just basically, I know that Cycle White put forward some concerns as well, didn't they, about LTN 120 maybe not being adhered to potentially in all its glory. So I was wondering if that's been captured again within these late reps, or that you've got a comment about that, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not covered substantially in the update paper. We do reference the fact that Active Travel Hub have said that they note that it's not referenced in the conditions that require the details of the footpaths and the cycleways through the site. It isn't referenced in the condition because it's guidance, and we don't reference anything other than planning policy in conditions. However, in undertaking the discharge process of the conditions, we will ensure that due regard is given to the document itself to ensure that those routes are appropriate where they can fulfil that guidance.
So apologies if I may
No,
quickly. So something like the 20 mph they've recommended. I think that's recommended in that LTN 120. That could be something that could come forward at a later date, potentially with highways, rather than within this report.
Yes.
And I'll just while you're getting that, and I note that in the sorry, so many pages here, page 79, within the Good Neighbourhood Plan, it's very, very important. The sustainable transport is absolutely critical. Improving existing highway and footpath network, provide connection between the village and the school, provide connection between the wider countryside and coastal paths. So this is a great opportunity to get this embedded at this stage.
Thank you, Councillor Jones-Evans. Councillor Critchison, followed by Councillor Cox. Councillor Critchison.
Thank you, Chair. I might be covering some of the things that Councillor Cox, because I'm bringing up the car park in the SANG area. I just wanted to ask some extra details on it about sort of exactly why it is part of this application, what it's trying to, its need really, of whether it could be changed or taken out, or quite why that is necessary. Is it because it's stopping traffic going through the actual housing area and parking there? What is it to encourage people to use this area from the wider community? And just, is there another way around making that, instead of putting concrete through that field, which doesn't seem completely necessary? So thank you.
Thank you, Ms Wilkins.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd firstly highlight that the proposal is not to put the concrete through the field to provide that car park or access road. The conditions and the consent, as councillors will note, agrees the surfacing and the construction of that. It would not be a concrete road that would provide it. We would ensure the surface was appropriate for the rural setting of the site. I'd also draw councillors' attention to paragraph 7.21 of the report that actually stipulates why the car park's been provided. It is in accordance with guidance provided by Natural England in relation to the provision of a SANG, where it stipulates that should you be looking to attract users for the SANG of an area of over 400-metre catchment, you should provide a car park. Ultimately, councillors, we walked up to the SANG from Tuttons Hill. A SANG is about a suitable alternative green space. It's about accessibility to the countryside for users of the community. That isn't just people who can walk there from somewhere else, because they may wish to walk in the local footpaths or to the beach or whatever, and all those references to the green spaces that have been identified within the discussion. Ultimately, a SANG is to provide a suitable alternative for those people who cannot do that, as well as other elements within it. So the provision of a car park allows somebody who wants to do a relatively flat circular route to go to the site and walk around it. They can have a walk in the countryside, and it is more accessible than some of the other areas within the local area. So in essence, the car park isn't solely just there just for the sake of making it easier for people. I suppose it is there to make it easier for people, but the guidance stipulates that a SANG of that size, a SANG of over 4 hectares, should have a car park. The size of that car park is dictated by effectively what the developer thinks to be appropriate and the likely nature of generation. And therefore, officers consider that it is appropriate in this instance to provide the car park to make that space more accessible to all those who wish to partake in a circular walk. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. A supplementary, Councillor Critchison.
Yes, please. So why is it there exactly? Could it not be part of the actual housing area so that it's not creating a separate area? Why could it not be